Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Danny Kowalski, though most folks on the highway just call me Chicago Danny. I've been hauling freight across America's interstates for 17 years now. And in all that time, I thought I knew every trick, every scam, and every type of lowlife that worked the truck stops and rest areas. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And the night I learned just how wrong I was started with what seemed like the luckiest break of my career. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, and I was sitting in my rig at the Flying J outside Toledo, nursing my third cup of coffee and staring at my nearly empty bank account on my phone screen. My last load had delivered early that morning, and my dispatcher hadn't called with anything new. In this business, no load means no money, and I had bills piling up back home in Chicago that wouldn't wait much longer. That's when my CB radio crackled to life with a voice I didn't recognize. "Breaker 19, this is looking for Chicago Danny. You got your ears on, driver?" I grabbed the handset, curious who might be calling me by name. "This is Chicago Danny. Go ahead." "Danny, this is Carl Hendricks from Premium Logistics. Got your number from your dispatcher. I hear you're looking for a load tonight." Premium Logistics was a company I'd heard of but never worked with directly. They handled high-value cargo and paid premium rates, but they were selective about their drivers. I sat up straighter in my seat. "That's affirmative, Carl. What you got for me?" "Time-sensitive delivery from Toledo to Atlanta. Needs to roll tonight and deliver by 6 a.m. Thursday. It's pharmaceutical supplies, temperature-controlled, high security. Pays $8,000 for the run." $8,000 was more than I usually made in a month. In this business, when someone offers you that kind of money for a 2-day run, it usually means one of three things. The cargo is extremely valuable, extremely dangerous, or extremely illegal. Sometimes all three. "What kind of pharmaceuticals?" I asked, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Medical research materials. All legitimate, all properly documented. Client just needs someone reliable who can handle a sensitive load without asking too many questions. Your dispatcher says you're that kind of driver." I thought about those bills waiting for me back home, about the truck payment that was already a week overdue. $8,000 would solve a lot of problems. "Where's the pickup?" "Industrial district on the east side of Toledo. I'm texting you the address now. Be there at 10 p.m. sharp. Client will have all the paperwork ready and you'll be loaded and rolling by 10:30. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was 8:45 p.m. Just enough time to grab a quick shower and something to eat before heading to the pickup location. "I'll take it," I said. "Excellent. One more thing, Danny. This load requires absolute discretion. No CB chatter about the cargo, no stops except for fuel and mandatory rest breaks, and no deviations from the route we provide. The client is very particular about security protocols." After Carl signed off, I sat there for a moment processing what had just happened. Premium freight companies didn't usually recruit drivers through CB radio, and they certainly didn't pay $8,000 for routine pharmaceutical deliveries. But the money was too good to pass up, and I'd been in this business long enough to know that high-paying loads often came with unusual circumstances. I grabbed a quick shower in the truck stop and wolfed down a sandwich from the deli counter. By 9:30, I was rolling toward the address Carl had sent me, following my GPS through increasingly industrial neighborhoods on Toledo's east side. The pickup location turned out to be a nondescript warehouse in an area where nobody asked questions about what went on after dark. The building had no company signs, no identifying marks, just an address painted in faded numbers above a loading dock. 2 men in expensive suits were waiting for me, along with a refrigerated trailer that was already sealed and ready to go. The older of the 2 men approached my cab as I backed up to the trailer. He was tall and thin with silver hair and the kind of pale complexion that suggested he spent most of his time indoors. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Danny Kowalski," he said. "I'm Mr. Peterson. This is my associate, Mr. Williams." Williams was younger and stockier, with the build of someone who had spent time in the gym or the military. He nodded at me but didn't speak, his attention focused on scanning the area around the warehouse as if he was watching for unwanted visitors. Peterson handed me a thick manila envelope. "Your bills of lading, route instructions, and delivery contact information are all in there. The trailer is pre-cooled and sealed. Under no circumstances should you open it during transport." "What exactly am I hauling?" I asked, more out of habit than genuine curiosity. "Medical research materials," Peterson replied smoothly. "Tissue samples, blood products, that sort of thing. Very valuable, very time-sensitive. The refrigeration system must not be shut off for any reason, and the trailer must remain sealed until you reach the delivery point in Atlanta." I nodded and started my pre-trip inspection of the trailer. Everything looked normal from the outside, just another refrigerated unit like thousands I'd pulled before. But as I walked around checking the tires and lights, I noticed the trailer seemed unusually heavy for medical supplies. Even loaded with research equipment and packaging, biological specimens shouldn't create the kind of weight that was making my truck work this hard to maintain position. "The road instructions are very specific," Peterson continued. "No major highways until you clear Ohio. Take Route 23 south through Columbus, then pick up I-75 in Cincinnati. The client has concerns about highway weigh stations and inspection points on the more direct routes." That was my second warning sign. Legitimate medical shipments didn't usually require avoiding weigh stations, and the route he'd outlined would add nearly 4 hours to my drive time. But $8,000 was $8,000, and I'd hauled plenty of loads where the client preferred discretion over efficiency. "Any special handling instructions?" I asked. "Just maintain temperature and don't let anyone else inspect the cargo. If you have any problems or delays, call this number immediately." He handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. "Questions?" I shook my head and signed the paperwork. Within 15 minutes, I was hooked up to the trailer and rolling out of the loading dock. In my mirrors, I watched Peterson and Williams climb into a black sedan and follow me until I reached the highway, then disappear into the night. The first few hours of the run went smoothly. Route 23 was mostly empty at that time of night, just the occasional local traffic and a few other trucks making their way south. The trailer rode well despite its apparent weight, and the refrigeration unit cycled on and off with mechanical precision. I settled into the familiar rhythm of night driving, watching the mile markers tick by and listening to late-night talk radio. It was around 1:30 a.m., somewhere south of Delaware, Ohio, when I first heard the sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the refrigeration unit and the road noise from my tires. But as I passed under a highway overpass and the ambient noise dropped for a moment, I heard it clearly. Someone was knocking on the inside of my trailer. Not the random settling sounds that cargo sometimes makes when it shifts during transport, but a deliberate, rhythmic knocking pattern. 3 quick raps, followed by a pause, then 3 more, like someone trying to get my attention. I pulled over at the next rest area and got out to inspect the trailer. Everything looked normal from the outside. The doors were still sealed, the refrigeration unit was humming along at the correct temperature, and there were no signs of damage or tampering. But as I stood there in the dark parking lot, I heard it again. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, knock. The sound was definitely coming from inside the trailer, and it definitely wasn't random. Someone or something was alive in there, trapped in that refrigerated space, trying to communicate with me. I pulled out the business card Peterson had given me and dialed the emergency number. It rang once before a voice I didn't recognize answered. "Problem? This is Danny Kowalski. I'm hauling your load to Atlanta, and I'm hearing sounds from inside the trailer. Sounds like someone knocking." There was a long pause. "That's impossible. The cargo is completely sealed and secure." Well, there's definitely something making noise in there. Should I open it up and check? No. The response was so sharp it made me jump. Under no circumstances are you to open that trailer. The cargo is extremely sensitive to temperature fluctuations and exposure to air. Any compromise of the seal could destroy the entire shipment. But if there's someone trapped in there, there isn't. You're hearing the refrigeration system cycling or maybe some of the equipment shifting. It's perfectly normal with this type of cargo. Just ignore it and keep driving. The line went dead. I stood there in the darkness, holding my phone and listening to the knocking continue from inside my trailer. Every instinct I had developed over 17 years of driving was telling me to break that seal and find out what I was really hauling. But $8,000 was more money than I had ever been paid for a single load, and I had already signed papers stating that I would deliver the cargo intact and unopened. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound that made my blood turn to ice water. Muffled screaming. Faint, desperate, terrified screaming coming from inside that refrigerated box. I grabbed my tools from the cab and headed for the trailer doors. $8,000 be damned. But before I could reach them, my CB radio crackled to life with a transmission that stopped me cold. "Chicago Danny, this is Road Dog Willie. You better get your ears on, brother. We got a situation developing on Route 23 southbound." I ran back to my cab and grabbed the handset. "Road Dog Willie, this is Chicago Danny. What kind of situation?" "Reports coming in about a refrigerated trailer being used to transport kidnapping victims. State police are setting up roadblocks and checking every reefer truck on that route. They're looking for a driver named Kowalski hauling pharmaceutical supplies." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Come again, Willie?" "You heard me right, Danny. FBI got a tip about human trafficking using medical transport as a cover story. They're looking for you specifically, brother. Word is you might not even know what you're carrying." The pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. The excessive payment, the unusual pickup location, the route-avoiding way stations, the sealed trailer I wasn't allowed to inspect. I wasn't hauling medical supplies. I was hauling human cargo, kidnapping victims being transported across state lines for God knows what purpose. The screaming from the trailer had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that was somehow even more terrifying. Were they unconscious? Dead? How long had they been in there? "Willie," I said into the CB, "how far back are those roadblocks?" "First one's about 20 miles behind you, moving north. Got another one being set up near Columbus. They got helicopters in the air too, Danny. If you're mixed up in this thing, you need to find a way out right now." I looked at my trailer in the dim light of the rest area. Somewhere inside that refrigerated box were people, maybe children, who had been kidnapped and were being transported to whatever fate awaited them in Atlanta. I was an unwitting accomplice to one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. But I was also trapped. If I called the police and tried to explain, who would believe that a veteran driver with 17 years of experience had accidentally gotten involved in human trafficking? The paperwork in my cab had my signature all over it. The money trail would lead directly back to me, and Peterson and Williams knew exactly who I was and where to find me. The CB crackled again. "Chicago Danny, this is Mountain Mike eastbound on Route 23. I just passed a convoy of state police heading your direction. Gotta be at least 6 units with their lights off, moving fast. Whatever you're gonna do, you better do it now." I had maybe 10 minutes before those roadblocks closed around me like a trap. 10 minutes to decide whether to try to run, try to hide, or try to do the right thing and face the consequences. That's when I heard something that made the decision for me. A child's voice, weak and terrified, calling out from inside the trailer. "Help us. Please, somebody help us." The money didn't matter anymore. My reputation didn't matter. Even my freedom didn't matter. Those were children in there, and they were counting on me to save them. I grabbed my tools and ran toward the trailer doors, determined to break that seal and free whoever was trapped inside. But as I reached for the lock, I heard the sound of vehicles approaching the rest area. Fast. Headlights swept across the parking lot as 3 black SUVs pulled in and surrounded my truck. Car doors slammed, and I could see figures moving in the darkness, spreading out to cut off any escape routes. These weren't state police. They moved wrong, positioned themselves wrong, and I couldn't see any official markings on their vehicles. These were Peterson's people, and they had been tracking me somehow, waiting for the right moment to retrieve their cargo. "Mr. Kowalski," a familiar voice called out. Peterson stepped into the glow of the rest area lighting, flanked by Williams and 4 other men I didn't recognize. "Step away from the trailer, please." "There are children in there," I said, still holding my tools. I heard them crying. Peterson smiled that cold smile again. "You heard machinery, Mr. Kowalski. Refrigeration equipment can be quite noisy. Now please, step away from the trailer before this becomes unpleasant." I looked at the men surrounding me, counting weapons and calculating odds. They were professionals, organized and well-equipped. I was one middle-aged truck driver with a toolbox and a lot of righteous anger. "The state police are looking for this truck," I said. "They know about the trafficking operation." "The state police are looking for a truck that doesn't exist," Peterson replied calmly. "The bills of lading in your cab show a perfectly legitimate pharmaceutical delivery. The company that hired you has no record of any driver named Danny Kowalski, and in about 30 minutes, when that trailer reaches its destination, all evidence of tonight's activities will disappear forever." Williams stepped closer, his hand moving towards something inside his jacket. "Boss, we need to move. Those roadblocks are getting closer." Peterson nodded. "Mr. Kowalski, you have a choice. You can climb back into your cab, deliver this load as contracted, collect your payment, and forget this night ever happened. Or you can continue to cause problems and discover just how far we're willing to go to protect our business interests." I looked at my truck, at the sealed trailer, at the men surrounding me with their dead eyes and cold smiles. I thought about those children's voices, about the muffled screaming I had heard, about the evil I had unknowingly become part of. And I realized that whatever choice I made in the next few seconds would determine not just whether those children lived or died, but whether I could live with myself afterward. The distant sound of sirens began to echo across the night, growing louder by the second. The roadblocks Willie had warned me about were closing in, and Peterson's men were getting nervous. Time was running out for all of us. Peterson's eyes never left mine as the sirens grew louder in the distance. 30 seconds, Mr. Kowalski. That's how long you have to make this decision. After that, we handle things our way." Williams and the other men had positioned themselves in a semicircle around me, cutting off any escape routes. Their hands rested casually near their weapons, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their eyes constantly scanned the perimeter of the rest area. They were professionals, but they were also getting nervous. "Boss," Williams said urgently, "we need to roll. Now." I looked at my truck, at the sealed trailer that contained God knows how many kidnapped victims, and made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I threw my toolbox as hard as I could at the nearest man, catching him in the chest and sending him stumbling backward. Then I sprinted toward the trailer doors, shouting at the top of my lungs, "Help! Police! There are children in this trailer!" I made it about 10 feet before something slammed into the back of my head, sending me sprawling face first onto the asphalt. Stars exploded across my vision, and I tasted blood in my mouth. Strong hands grabbed me by the arms and hauled me to my feet. "That was very stupid, Mr. Kowalski," Peterson said calmly. "Williams, secure the driver. Jenkins, get that trailer moving. We have about 5 minutes before this place is crawling with state police." Through my blurred vision, I watched one of Peterson's men climb into my cab and fire up the engine. The familiar rumble of my diesel sounded wrong somehow, like machinery being used for evil purposes instead of honest work. "You can't do this," I gasped, spitting blood onto the pavement. "Those are children in there, innocent children." "Those are commodities," Peterson corrected. "And you were paid very well to transport commodities without asking questions. Your moral crisis is not our concern." William zip-tied my hands behind my back and shoved me toward one of the black SUVs. "What do we do with him, boss?" Peterson considered this for a moment. "He's seen too much and caused too many problems. Take him to the facility. We'll decide what to do with him after the delivery is complete." The facility. Whatever that meant, it didn't sound like somewhere I wanted to go. But as they forced me into the back seat of the SUV, I caught a glimpse of something that gave me hope. Red and blue lights were visible on the horizon, still distant, but getting closer fast. The roadblocks Willie had warned me about were converging on our location. If I could delay Peterson's people for just a few more minutes, the state police might arrive in time to stop this nightmare. "You know what I don't understand?" I said as Williams climbed into the driver's seat. "How did you find me so fast? I was only stopped here for maybe 15 minutes. Peterson, sitting in the passenger seat, turned to look at me with that cold smile. "GPS tracking, Mr. Kowalski. Every truck in our operation is monitored in real time. We knew exactly where you were from the moment you left Toledo." "Your operation," I repeated. "How many drivers are involved in this?" "More than you might think. Less than you might fear. The trucking industry is perfect for our needs. Hundreds of thousands of vehicles moving cargo across the country every day. Most of it never inspected, never questioned. A few specially selected drivers, a few carefully crafted cover stories, and we can transport anything anywhere." The SUV was moving now, following my truck as it pulled out of the rest area and back onto Route 23. Through the rear window, I could see those police lights getting closer, but they were still several miles behind us. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked, trying to keep Peterson talking while I worked at the zip ties around my wrists. They were tight, but not impossible to slip if I could dislocate my thumb. 3 years, Peterson said proudly. "We started small, moving single targets for specific clients, but the demand grew quickly. Turns out there's a very lucrative market for certain types of people, especially children. Clean, healthy, untraceable children." My stomach turned. "You're talking about human trafficking?" "We prefer to think of it as logistics. Supply and demand, Mr. Kowalski. We simply connect people who have something to sell with people who want to buy. The moral implications are irrelevant." I had managed to work one hand partially free of the zip ties, but I needed more time. "Who are your buyers?" Williams glanced at Peterson in the rearview mirror. "Boss, we shouldn't be telling him this stuff." "Why not?" Peterson shrugged. "Mr. Kowalski won't be in a position to share information with anyone after tonight. Might as well satisfy his curiosity." He turned back to me. "Our clients are diverse. Wealthy individuals looking for domestic help that won't ask for wages or time off. Research facilities that need human subjects for experiments that can't be conducted legally. Entertainment venues that cater to specialized tastes. And of course, organ harvesting operations that prefer their inventory to be fresh." I felt sick. Each casual word Peterson spoke represented unimaginable suffering for innocent people, many of them children, and I had been helping them do it. "The children in my trailer," I said. "Where did they come from?" "Foster homes, mostly. Runaways, street kids, the kind of people society doesn't miss when they disappear. We have contacts in social services, juvenile detention facilities, homeless shelters. It's remarkably easy to acquire inventory when you know the right people to bribe." My right hand was almost free now, but I needed to keep Peterson distracted for a few more seconds. "How many?" "Tonight? 7 children between the ages of 8 and 14. All healthy, all documented with complete medical records. They're being delivered to a private research facility outside Atlanta that specializes in neurological experiments. The client is paying $50,000 per subject, which makes this a very profitable evening for everyone involved. 7 children. 7 innocent kids who had been kidnapped from their homes or shelters or wherever they had been, stuffed into a refrigerated trailer like cargo, and were now being transported to a fate worse than death. My hand slipped free of the zip ties. I lunged forward, grabbing the steering wheel and yanking it hard to the right. The SUV swerved across the center line and into the oncoming lane, tires squealing as Williams fought to regain control. "Son of a bitch!" Williams shouted, throwing an elbow back that caught me in the ribs. But it was too late. The SUV had crossed into the path of an oncoming semi-truck, and the driver of that truck was laying on his air horn and hitting his brakes hard. Williams yanked the wheel back to the left, but overcorrected, sending us sliding sideways across the asphalt. We hit the guardrail at about 40 miles per hour. The impact threw me against the side window hard enough to spider the glass, but it also threw Peterson and Williams forward into the dashboard. The SUV spun twice before coming to rest in a cloud of steam from the ruptured radiator. Through the windshield, I could see my truck still moving south on Route 23, getting smaller in the distance. But I could also see something else that made my heart race with hope. The state police roadblock had finally caught up with us. 6 patrol cars with their lights flashing were spread across the highway about a quarter-mile ahead, and my truck was heading straight toward them with no way to avoid the checkpoint. Peterson was unconscious, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Williams was conscious but dazed, fumbling for his weapon with hands that didn't seem to be working properly. I kicked out the passenger window and crawled through the opening, cutting myself on the broken glass but not caring. The other 2 SUVs had stopped when they saw our accident, and men were piling out with weapons drawn. I ran toward the tree line that bordered the highway, hoping to find cover in the darkness before they could get a clear shot at me. Gunfire erupted behind me, bullets whining through the trees and splintering bark from the trunks around me. But they were shooting blind into the darkness, and I had the advantage of knowing this stretch of highway from years of driving it. My CB radio was still clipped to my belt from when I had grabbed it at the rest area. I keyed the mic as I ran. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Chicago Danny to any state police monitoring this channel. I have information about the human trafficking operation you're looking for. My truck is approaching your roadblock right now with 7 kidnapped children in the trailer." The response was immediate. "This is Ohio State Police. Identify yourself and your location." "Danny Kowalski, about 2 miles north of your roadblock on Route 23. The men who kidnapped those children are armed and extremely dangerous. They're in black SUVs, and they've been tracking the truck by GPS." Through the trees, I could see the roadblock ahead. My truck had reached the checkpoint and been forced to stop. State troopers were surrounding it with their weapons drawn, shouting commands I couldn't hear from this distance. One of the troopers had climbed onto the back of the trailer and was working to cut the seal on the doors. Even from half a mile away, I could see the urgency in his movements. Behind me, Peterson's men were still shooting into the woods, but they seemed to be falling back toward their vehicles. They knew the police were closing in, and their priority now was escape, not capturing me. The trailer doors swung open. Even at this distance, I could see the trooper stagger backward from whatever he found inside. Other officers ran forward to help, and within seconds, small figures were being carried out of the trailer and placed on stretchers that had appeared from somewhere. Children. 7 children who were alive and would now have a chance to go home to their families. My legs gave out, and I collapsed against a tree trunk, overwhelmed by relief and exhaustion. The sound of gunfire behind me was fading as Peterson's surviving men retreated, probably heading for some predetermined escape route that would take them far from this compromised operation. But the children were safe. That was all that mattered. My CB crackled again. "Chicago Danny, this is Ohio State Police. We have secured the truck and recovered 7 victims. Where are you now?" "In the woods north of your position," I replied. "The traffickers are trying to escape in black SUVs. There were at least 6 men.
possibly more. We have helicopters in the air and additional units responding. Stay where you are and keep this channel open. We're sending officers to find you." I leaned back against the tree and tried to process what had just happened. In the space of a few hours, I had gone from being an unwitting accomplice to human trafficking to being a key witness in what would probably be one of the biggest criminal cases in Ohio history. But something Peterson had said was bothering me. He had mentioned that they had been running this operation for 3 years, using specially selected drivers to transport their victims. How many other truckers were involved? How many loads like this had been successfully delivered before I came along and screwed up their system? And most disturbing of all, how had they known to contact me specifically? Peterson had claimed he got my number from my dispatcher, but that didn't explain how they knew I was available for a load, or how they knew I was the type of driver who wouldn't ask too many questions. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the night air. Searchlights swept through the trees, and I could hear K-9 units barking in the distance as they tracked Peterson's men through the woods. I keyed my CB again. "Ohio State Police, this is Chicago Danny. I have information about the trafficking operation that you need to hear. There are other drivers involved, and this goes deeper than just tonight's incident." "Copy that. Stay on this channel and keep talking. We need to know everything you can tell us." As I started to relay everything Peterson had told me during our conversation, I realized that tonight was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, other trucks were rolling down other highways, carrying other victims to other destinations. And until we could identify all the drivers involved in Peterson's network, those shipments would continue. The children in my trailer were safe, but they were just 7 victims in what was probably a much larger operation. How many more were out there, trapped in refrigerated boxes, counting on someone to hear their cries for help? I thought about all the times over the years when I had heard strange sounds from trailers, when I had been offered unusually high-paying loads with mysterious cargo, when dispatchers had called me with jobs that seemed too good to be true. How many times had I unknowingly walked away from situations like this? The searchlight from one of the helicopters found me, and I raised my hands to show I wasn't armed. Within minutes, state troopers were crashing through the underbrush toward my location, their weapons drawn but not pointed at me. "Danny Kowalski?" one of them called out. "That's me. You're under arrest." I nodded and put my hands behind my back, feeling the familiar bite of handcuffs around my wrists. I was a witness, but I was also a suspect until they could sort out the details of what had happened tonight. As they led me back toward the highway, I could see ambulances lined up near my truck. Medical personnel were working on the children who had been pulled from the trailer, checking vital signs and starting IV lines. Even from a distance, I could see how small they were, how young and fragile. One of the children, a girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, looked up as I passed and made eye contact with me. Her eyes were huge and filled with terror, but when she saw me, something changed in her expression. She whispered something to the paramedic treating her, who looked over at me and nodded. The trooper escorting me paused. "She says to tell you thank you," he said quietly. "Says she heard you calling for help on the radio, and that's when she knew someone was coming to save them." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. 7 children were going home to their families tonight because I had finally done the right thing. It didn't erase the fact that I had almost delivered them to a fate worse than death. But it was something. As we reached the patrol car, I looked back one more time at my truck. 17 years I had been driving that rig, hauling freight across America's highways, making an honest living in an honest business. Now it was a crime scene, evidence in a federal trafficking case that would probably take years to fully investigate. My career as a truck driver was over, and depending on what the prosecutors decided, I might be facing serious prison time for my role in tonight's events. But 7 children were alive and safe, and that had to count for something. The trooper helped me into the back seat of his patrol car. "We're going to need you to tell us everything you know about this operation," he said. "Names, dates, locations, anything you can remember." "I'll tell you everything," I promised. "But you need to understand, this is bigger than just what happened tonight. Peterson mentioned other drivers, other shipments. This is a network, and they've been doing this for years." The trooper nodded grimly. "We figured as much. The FBI is already coordinating with law enforcement agencies in multiple states. This is going to be a long investigation." As we drove away from the scene, I watched my truck disappear in the distance. Somewhere out there, Peterson and his surviving men were probably regrouping, planning their next move. They had lost 7 victims and a carefully planned operation, but they still had contacts in the trucking industry, still had other drivers they could use, still had buyers waiting for their human cargo. The fight was just beginning. But for tonight, 7 children were safe, and that was enough. The FBI field office in Columbus was a sterile, institutional building that smelled like cheap coffee and fluorescent lighting. I had been there for 6 hours, telling my story over and over again to different agents, each one asking the same questions from slightly different angles, trying to catch me in a lie or uncover details I might have forgotten. Agent Sarah Mitchell was the lead investigator on what they were now calling Operation Rolling Thunder. She was a small, sharp-featured woman in her 40s who had the kind of intense focus that made you feel like she could see right through your skull and read your thoughts directly. "Tell me again about the phone call," she said, checking her notes. The voice that identified himself as Carl Hendricks from Premium Logistics. Like I said before, I'd never heard of him. He knew my name, knew I was looking for a load, said he got my information from my dispatcher. "And you never verified this with your dispatcher?" I shook my head. It was late, and $8,000 was too good to pass up. In this business, you don't always have time to check every detail when a premium load comes along. Agent Mitchell made another note. "We've been in contact with Premium Logistics. They have no record of any employee named Carl Hendricks, and they certainly didn't hire you for any delivery to Atlanta. So it was all fake. The company exists, but someone was using their name without authorization. We think Peterson's organization has been impersonating legitimate freight companies to recruit drivers. Makes the operation look more credible." She pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It showed Peterson, but he looked different somehow. Younger, with darker hair and no glasses. "This is Richard Clemens, also known as Peterson, also known by at least 6 other aliases. He's been wanted by federal authorities for 3 years in connection with human trafficking operations across the Southeast. The man you knew as Williams is actually Marcus Webb, a former military contractor who specialized in logistics and transportation." I studied the photograph. So, everything they told me was a lie. Not everything. The part about this being a 3-year operation appears to be accurate. We've been tracking unusual patterns in missing persons cases. Runaways, foster children, homeless individuals who disappeared from cities along major trucking routes. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Agent Mitchell pulled out a thick file folder. What we didn't realize until tonight was how they were transporting their victims. Using commercial truckers as unwitting accomplices was brilliant, actually. Thousands of trucks on the road every day, most of them never inspected. Drivers who are trained not to ask questions about their cargo. How many other drivers are involved? That's what we're trying to determine. Based on what Peterson told you during your conversation, we estimate there could be dozens of drivers who have unknowingly transported victims over the past 3 years. The challenge is identifying them. She opened the file and spread out several documents across the table. These are shipping manifests we've recovered from various sources. Truck stops, weigh stations, delivery receipts. All of them show pharmaceutical or medical supply deliveries that match the pattern Peterson used with you. High-value cargo, unusual routes, premium payments, drivers recruited through CB radio or word-of-mouth recommendations. I looked at the documents. recognizing some of the truck stops and routes. Jesus, how many victims are we talking about? Conservative estimate? Maybe 200 children over 3 years, possibly more. The number hit me like a physical blow. 200 children. 200 lives destroyed because drivers like me had been too greedy or too trusting to ask the right questions. There's something else, Agent Mitchell continued. The children we recovered from your trailer were in remarkably good condition considering what they'd been through. They were sedated but not harmed. No signs of physical abuse, adequate nutrition, proper medical care. That suggests Peterson's organization was very careful about maintaining the quality of their merchandise. Where are they now? Safe houses, mostly. We're working with social services to reunite them with families where possible, but many of them were already in the system when they were taken. Foster homes, juvenile detention facilities, group homes. Peterson was right about one thing. They targeted children that society tends to overlook. Agent Mitchell closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Here's where it gets complicated for you, Mr. Kowalski. Legally speaking, you were an accessory to kidnapping and human trafficking. You transported victims across state lines, accepted payment for that transportation, and initially resisted opening the trailer even after you suspected what was inside. My stomach dropped. But I didn't know. I believe that you didn't know. The evidence supports your version of events. But ignorance isn't always a legal defense, especially in federal cases involving crimes against children. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. However, your actions, once you realized what was happening, demonstrate a clear intent to help the victims. You risked your life to stop the delivery, provided crucial intelligence about the operation, and directly contributed to the rescue of 7 children who would otherwise have disappeared forever. What does that mean for me? It means we want to make a deal. Full cooperation with the investigation, including helping us identify other drivers who might have been used by Peterson's network. Testify in federal court against everyone we arrest. In exchange, we'll recommend immunity from prosecution and entry into the Witness Protection Program. Witness protection. I had seen enough movies to know what that meant. New identity, new location, new life far away from everything and everyone I had ever known. It was a chance to start over, but it was also a kind of death. How long would the investigation take? Months, possibly years. Peterson's network had connections in multiple states, possibly multiple countries. We're talking about dismantling an entire criminal organization. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. Another agent entered and whispered something in Mitchell's ear. Her expression darkened. "What is it?" I asked. "We just got word from our surveillance teams. 3 more trucks matching Peterson's operational pattern have been intercepted in the past 2 hours. 1 in Tennessee, 1 in Georgia, 1 in North Carolina. All 3 were carrying kidnapped children." My heart raced. "Did you save them?" "The children are safe. But here's the problem. All 3 drivers claimed they had no idea what they were carrying. All 3 had been recruited through CB radio contacts using fake company names. All 3 were paid premium rates for what they thought were legitimate pharmaceutical deliveries." She pulled out a map of the southeastern United States and spread it across the table. Red pins marked various locations, forming a pattern that stretched from Florida to Virginia. "This is bigger than we thought," she said grimly. Peterson wasn't running a single operation out of Toledo. He was coordinating multiple cells across the southeast, each one using the same methodology but operating independently. Even if we've captured Peterson and Williams, the other cells are probably still active. I stared at the map, counting the red pins. There had to be at least 30 locations marked, representing truck stops, rest areas, and industrial facilities that had been used as pickup or delivery points for trafficking operations. "How many more children are out there right now?" I asked. We don't know, but based on the pattern we're seeing, there could be dozens of shipments in transit at any given time, children being moved from acquisition points to delivery destinations, all of them hidden in plain sight on America's highways. Agent Mitchell's phone buzzed. She answered it, listened for a moment, then hung up with a grim expression. That was our field office in Atlanta. They raided the facility where your trailer was supposed to be delivered. It was a private research compound that specialized in medical experiments using human subjects, mostly children. Did they find anything? Bodies. Lots of them. Children who had been used as test subjects for experimental drugs, surgical procedures, behavioral modification techniques. Some of the victims had been there for months, maybe longer. I felt sick. Those 7 children I had been transporting weren't just being sold. They were being delivered to a death camp where they would have been tortured and experimented on until they died. There's more, Agent Mitchell continued. The facility had detailed records of all their test subjects, including where they came from and how they were transported. Every single one of them was delivered by truck drivers who thought they were hauling medical supplies. How many drivers? At least 40 over the past 2 years. All of them recruited through the same methods Peterson used on you. Most of them probably never knew what they were really carrying. The scope of the operation was staggering. 40 drivers, hundreds of victims, multiple cells operating across the Southeast, all of it coordinated through a network that used the trucking industry as its delivery system. We need your help, Agent Mitchell said bluntly. You're the only driver we've found who realized what was happening and tried to stop it. The others either never figured it out, or they figured it out and kept quiet because they were being paid so well. What kind of help? We want you to go undercover. Help us identify the other cells in Peterson's network by posing as a driver looking for high-paying loads. Your reputation in the trucking community is intact. None of the other drivers know about your involvement in last night's incident. You could make contact with the people running these operations and help us gather intelligence. I stared at her. You want me to become bait. We want you to help us save children. How many more 7-year-olds are sitting in refrigerated trailers right now, waiting for someone to hear their cries for help? The image of those children being carried out of my trailer flashed through my mind. The little girl who had thanked me for saving them, the terror in their eyes, the knowledge that they had been hours away from a nightmare that would have ended with their deaths. If I do this, if I help you identify the other cells, will it really stop the trafficking? It's our best shot. Peterson's network is sophisticated, but it's not irreplaceable. If we can identify all the players, all the locations, all the methods they use, we can shut it down permanently. Agent Mitchell leaned forward. But I need to be honest with you. This would be extremely dangerous. If Peterson's associates discover that you're working with us, they won't hesitate to kill you. These people have murdered hundreds of children. One truck driver won't even register as a moral consideration. I thought about my life before last night. 17 years of driving trucks, making honest money, living a simple existence on America's highways. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean. I could sleep at night knowing I had earned my pay through hard work and honest service. Now I was being offered a chance to redeem myself for the role I had unknowingly played in Peterson's operation. A chance to use my knowledge of the trucking industry to help law enforcement shut down one of the most evil enterprises I had ever encountered. But it would mean leaving my old life behind forever. Even if I survived the undercover operation, I would never be able to return to normal trucking. Too many people would know who I was, what I had done, what I represented. How long would I have to decide? We need an answer tonight. Every hour we wait, more children disappear into Peterson's network. Every day that passes makes it harder to identify the other cells before they realize we're onto them. Through the window of the FBI office, I could see the lights of Columbus spread out below us. Somewhere in that city, and in cities across the country, there were children going to sleep in their beds,
unaware that predators like Peterson were planning to snatch them away from everything they had ever known. And somewhere out there on the highways, truck drivers who thought they were hauling medical supplies were actually transporting those children toward fates worse than death. I had a choice to make. I could take the immunity deal, enter witness protection, and spend the rest of my life trying to forget about the evil I had encountered. Or I could fight back, risk my life to help destroy the network that had used me and dozens of other drivers as unwitting accomplices to unspeakable crimes. If I do this, I said slowly, I want guarantees about the children we rescue. I want to know they're going to safe places, that they're getting the help they need to recover from what they've been through. Agent Mitchell nodded. You have my word. And I want regular updates on the investigation. If we're shutting down this network, I want to know that we're actually making a difference. Agreed. I took a deep breath and made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I'll do it. Agent Mitchell smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Welcome to Operation Rolling Thunder, Mr. Kowalski. Let's go save some children. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the cab of a different truck at a truck stop outside Birmingham, Alabama, waiting for a call that might never come. The FBI had set me up with a new identity. Danny Kowalski was supposedly recovering from the accident that had destroyed his truck on Route 23, while his cousin Bobby Kowalski had taken over his routes and was looking for high-paying specialty loads. The truck was equipped with recording equipment hidden in places I'd never think to look, and Agent Mitchell's voice came through my earpiece with regular check-ins. But after 3 weeks of making contacts and putting out feelers through CB radio networks, I hadn't gotten a single bite from Peterson's network. Maybe they've shut down operations after what happened in Ohio, I had suggested to Mitchell during our last briefing. Or maybe they're being more careful about who they recruit, she had replied. Peterson's organization was built on trust networks, drivers recommending other drivers, dispatchers vouching for people they'd worked with for years. You're an unknown quantity now, and they might be waiting to see if you're legitimate. That was the problem with undercover work in the trucking industry. Unlike other criminal enterprises that operated through anonymous contacts and one-time deals, human trafficking required ongoing relationships built over months or years. The people running these operations needed to trust their drivers completely, because one mistake, one driver with a conscience, could bring down the entire network. My CB radio crackled to life, interrupting my thoughts. Breaker 19, this is looking for Bobby Kowalski. You got your ears on, driver? My heart rate spiked. This was the first time in 3 weeks that anyone had called for me specifically by my cover name. I grabbed the handset, trying to keep my voice casual. This is Bobby Kowalski. Go ahead. Bobby, this is Linda Harper from Specialized Freight Solutions. Got your name from a mutual friend who said you might be interested in some high-value cargo work. Linda Harper. Agent Mitchell had briefed me on her. She was suspected of being a mid-level coordinator in Peterson's network, but they'd never been able to prove anything. If she was calling me, it meant the network was still operational despite the Ohio incident. Depends on what kind of high-value cargo we're talking about, I replied. The kind that pays premium rates for drivers who understand discretion. You available for a consultation? This was it. The contact Mitchell and I had been waiting for. But something felt wrong about Linda's voice. Too casual, too confident, like she wasn't worried about law enforcement surveillance. Where and when? I asked. Truck stop on I-65 north of Montgomery. Mile marker 181. Tonight at 11 p.m. Look for a blue Peterbilt with Alabama plates. Come alone and bring your commercial license and medical card. The transmission ended before I could respond. I immediately contacted Mitchell through the secure channel built into my CB radio. Did you get that? Every word. We're tracking Linda Harper's location now, and we'll have surveillance teams in place at the meeting point. Are you ready for this? Was I ready? I had been mentally preparing for this moment for 3 weeks, but now that it was actually happening, I felt like I was about to jump into a pool without knowing how deep the water was. As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, your job is to gather intelligence and establish credibility within their network. Don't try to be a hero. Don't push for information they're not willing to give. Just play the role of a driver who needs money and doesn't ask questions. The drive to the meeting point took 2 hours, giving me plenty of time to think about what I was walking into. Linda Harper might be a minor player in Peterson's network, or she might be running her own independent operation. She might be offering me a legitimate opportunity to infiltrate the trafficking organization, or she might have figured out who I really was and be setting me up for elimination. There was only one way to find out. Mile marker 181 was at a small truck stop that catered primarily to local drivers rather than long-haul truckers. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were noticed immediately. I found Linda Harper's blue Peterbilt parked in the shadows at the back of the lot, away from the main traffic patterns. Linda herself was not what I had expected. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades behind the wheel. She looked like any other experienced driver, the kind of person you'd trust to give you directions or recommend a good diner. That was probably the point. "Bobby Kowalski?" she asked as I approached her truck. "That's me." "Good. Hop in. We need to talk privately." Her cab was clean and well-maintained, with family photos taped to the dashboard and a CB radio tuned to the standard trucking channels. If I hadn't known better, I would have assumed she was just another professional driver trying to make an honest living. "Your cousin Danny had quite an accident a few weeks ago," she said without preamble. My blood turned to ice. If she knew about Danny Kowalski's connection to the Ohio incident, then she probably knew a lot more about me than Agent Mitchell had anticipated. "Yeah, real shame about that wreck," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lost his truck and damn near lost his life. That's why I'm picking up some of his rotes." "Interesting thing about that accident," Linda continued, studying my face carefully. "State police report says his truck was found abandoned at a roadblock, but there was no evidence of a crash. Almost like he just walked away from it." This was not going according to plan. Linda Harper knew too much, and she was testing me to see how I would respond. One wrong word could blow my cover and end the investigation before it really started. "Danny doesn't like to talk about what happened that night," I said. "Something about getting mixed up with the wrong kind of people. That's all he'll tell me." Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The wrong kind of people. That's one way to put it." She reached into a briefcase behind her seat and pulled out a manila folder. "Here's what I think happened to your cousin Danny. I think he got recruited for a special job by some people who weren't entirely honest about what they needed him to do. And when he figured out what was really going on, he decided to play hero instead of minding his own business." She opened the folder and showed me photographs. Pictures of my truck at the Ohio rest area, pictures of Peterson and Williams in handcuffs, pictures of the children being carried out of the trailer on stretchers. The result was 7 dead kids and a multi-million-dollar operation burned to the ground. 7 dead kids. That wasn't what had happened. The children had been rescued alive. But if Linda thought they were dead, it meant she didn't have access to the real details of what had occurred that night. "Danny never told me any of this," I said. "Of course he didn't. Because Danny Kowalski is working with the FBI now, helping them identify other drivers in our network, and Bobby Kowalski is probably wearing a wire right now, trying to gather evidence for the federal prosecutors." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it, but I forced myself to remain calm, to play the role of a confused driver who didn't understand what was happening. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just trying to make a living hauling freight. If you've got work for me, let's talk business. If not, I've got other prospects to pursue." Linda stared at me for a long moment. as if she was trying to read my thoughts through my facial expressions. Then she laughed. "You're good, Bobby. I'll give you that. Either you're exactly what you appear to be, a simple truck driver who needs money, or you're the best undercover agent the FBI has ever produced." She closed the folder and put it back in her briefcase. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to offer you a job. A real job, hauling real cargo for real money. Nothing illegal, nothing questionable, just premium freight that pays premium rates. What's the catch? No catch. But if you are working with law enforcement, this job will prove it. Because the only way to complete this delivery is to break about a dozen federal laws, and no legitimate truck driver would agree to do it." She handed me a business card with an address in Georgia. "If you're interested in making $50,000 for 3 days' work, be at this location tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Come alone, bring your own truck, and be prepared to haul cargo that can't be inspected by anyone except the final recipient." $50,000. That was more than most drivers made in a year, which meant whatever I'd be hauling was either extremely valuable or extremely illegal. Probably both. What kind of cargo? The kind that doesn't officially exist. The kind that certain government agencies would very much like to intercept before it reaches its destination. The kind that requires drivers with no moral qualms about breaking laws they disagree with. Linda climbed out of her cab and walked around to my side of the truck. "Here's the thing about your cousin Danny's situation. He thought he was saving those children, but all he really did was redirect them to a different fate. The people who were supposed to receive that shipment didn't just give up and go home. They found alternative sources." "What do you mean?" "I mean those 7 kids were replaced within 48 hours. Younger ones this time, healthier ones. The market doesn't care about individual victims. It only cares about supply and demand." She leaned closer to my window. "So, if you are working with the FBI, you should know that your heroic cousin's actions didn't actually save anyone. They just made the people in this business more careful about who they trust." Linda walked back to her truck and climbed into the driver's seat. "Decision time, Bobby. Tomorrow night, Georgia address, $50,000. If you show up, you're one of us. If you don't, well, let's just say we'll know what that means, too." Her truck started up and pulled away, leaving me sitting alone in the parking lot with a business card that probably represented either the biggest break in the investigation or the most elaborate trap ever set for an undercover federal witness. I contacted Agent Mitchell immediately. "How much of that did you get?" "Enough to know that Linda Harper is a lot smarter than we gave her credit for. She knows about your real identity, she knows about the Ohio incident, and she's testing to see if you're working with us." "What about her claim that the children were replaced, that they found other victims within 48 hours? There was a long pause before Mitchell responded. "We've been tracking missing persons reports across the Southeast. There has been an uptick in child disappearances over the past 3 weeks. We weren't sure if it was connected to Peterson's network or just statistical variance. So she might be telling the truth. It's possible. These organizations are resilient. When one supply line gets disrupted, they quickly establish alternatives. Shutting down Peterson's cell might have forced them to accelerate other operations to meet their commitments." I looked at the business card Linda had given me, an address in rural Georgia, probably another industrial facility where trucks could be loaded and unloaded without attracting attention. "What do you want me to do?" "That depends. How confident are you that this isn't a trap?" "I'm not confident at all. Linda Harper knows too much about what happened in Ohio. She might be testing me, or she might be planning to eliminate me as a threat to their operations. But if it is legitimate, if she's really offering you a chance to infiltrate their network at a higher level, it could be exactly what we need to identify their major players and shipping routes." I thought about those 7 children being carried out of my trailer, about Linda's claim that they had been replaced within days by other victims. If that was true, then everything I had risked my life for had been meaningless.
The network had simply adapted and continued operating. "There's something else," I said. "Linda mentioned cargo that certain government agencies want to intercept. That doesn't sound like human trafficking. That sounds like weapons or drugs or classified materials." Peterson's network might be more diversified than we thought. Human trafficking could be just one branch of a larger criminal organization that handles multiple types of illegal cargo. The implications of that were staggering. If Linda was offering me a job that involved transporting classified materials or weapons rather than kidnapped children, it meant we were dealing with an organization that had connections to international terrorism or espionage networks. "I think I have to take the job," I said finally. "Bobby, if this is a trap, if they've figured out who you really are, they will kill you. No question, no hesitation, no chance for rescue. Once you walk into that facility in Georgia, you're completely on your own. And if I don't take the job, we lose our only chance to infiltrate their network at a level where we can actually shut them down permanently." Agent Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "It's your call, but I want you to understand what you're risking. This isn't just about your life anymore. If Linda Harper's organization is involved in weapons trafficking or espionage, the national security implications could be enormous." I looked out at the truck stop parking lot, at the normal truckers going about their normal business, hauling normal cargo to normal destinations. 3 weeks ago, I had been one of them. Now I was sitting in a truck equipped with FBI surveillance equipment, preparing to walk into what might be the most dangerous situation of my life. But somewhere out there, children were sitting in refrigerated trailers, waiting for someone to hear their cries for help. And somewhere else, weapons or classified materials were being moved by drivers who had no idea what they were really transporting. The network had to be stopped, even if stopping it meant sacrificing the only undercover asset the FBI had managed to place inside the operation. "I'll be at the Georgia location tomorrow night," I said. "God help you, Bobby. God help us all." As I hung up the radio, I realized that tomorrow night would determine not just the success or failure of Operation Rolling Thunder, but whether the trafficking network that had used me and dozens of other drivers would continue operating indefinitely. Either way, my life as Bobby Kowalski was about to end. The question was whether Danny Kowalski would live long enough to see justice served. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been driving trucks for 13 years. Mostly hauling automotive parts between Detroit and various assembly plants throughout the Midwest. It's honest work that pays decent money, and I've always prided myself on being the kind of driver who minds his own business and gets his loads delivered on time without any drama. That philosophy served me well for over a decade, right up until the night I made a wrong turn that led me into the darkest corner of America's highway system. A place where predators hunt and innocent people disappear without a trace. It was a Thursday night in mid-November when I was running a load of transmission components from Detroit to a Ford plant in Louisville. The weather was typical for that time of year. Cold, overcast, with the kind of persistent drizzle that makes driving more challenging than it needs to be. I had been on the road for about 6 hours and was making good time on Interstate 65 southbound when my usual route hit an unexpected snag. The highway patrol had set up an accident investigation scene that blocked both southbound lanes just north of Indianapolis. According to the CB chatter, a multi-vehicle pileup involving 3 trucks had shut down traffic completely, and the backup was already stretching for miles. Drivers were reporting wait times of 4 to 6 hours before the highway would reopen. I couldn't afford that kind of delay. My delivery was scheduled for 6 a.m. Friday morning, and my dispatcher had made it clear that Ford didn't tolerate late shipments. Missing this delivery window could cost me the contract and potentially damage my reputation with other automotive clients. "Any drivers out there know a good bypass around this mess?" I called out on the CB. "This is Moondog Mike," came the reply. "You can take State Route 46 west to State Route 37 south. Adds about 30 miles to your trip, but it'll get you around the backup. Just follow the signs toward Bloomington, then pick up 37 south to I-64 west. You'll be back on 65 before you know it." I thanked Mike and took the next exit, following his directions onto State Route 46. It was a 2-lane highway that wound through rural Indiana farmland, the kind of back road that truckers rarely used unless they were avoiding problems on the main interstates. The traffic was light, mostly local vehicles, and the occasional truck like mine seeking an alternate route around the I-65 closure. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The road was well maintained, clearly marked, and I was making decent time despite the reduced speed limits through small towns and agricultural areas. I passed through several communities, places with names like Ellettsville and Freedom, where the main streets were lined with farm equipment dealers and family-owned restaurants that had probably been serving truckers for generations. But as the night wore on and I got deeper into the rural countryside, the character of the road began to change. The pavement became rougher, the shoulders narrower, and the signs less frequent and harder to read in the darkness and drizzle. I started to worry that I might have missed a turn somewhere, but the CB radio was picking up chatter from other drivers who seemed to be following the same route, so I pressed on. That's when I saw the sign for the Whispering Pines rest area. It was one of those old-style highway rest stops that you don't see much anymore. A single building with restrooms and vending machines, surrounded by a parking area large enough for maybe 20 cars and 4 or 5 trucks. Most states had replaced facilities like this with modern travel plazas that included gas stations, restaurants, and shopping, but apparently this one had been left behind by progress. I wasn't planning to stop. I still had plenty of fuel, and I'd grabbed coffee and a sandwich before leaving the interstate. But as I passed the entrance, I noticed something that caught my attention. There were several trucks parked in the lot, more than I would have expected for such a remote location at this time of night. And there seemed to be unusual activity around the vehicles, people moving between trucks, shadowy figures that didn't look like drivers taking mandatory rest breaks. Professional curiosity got the better of me. In 13 years of trucking, I'd learned to trust my instincts about situations that didn't look right. Drug deals, hijacking operations, and human trafficking all used remote rest areas as meeting points and transfer locations. Most of the time, it was none of my business, but sometimes calling in suspicious activity to the state police could prevent crimes or help catch criminals. I pulled into the rest area and parked my rig near the back of the lot, away from the main cluster of vehicles but close enough to observe what was happening. From my vantage point, I could see 5 trucks parked in a rough semicircle around the central building, with several cars and SUVs positioned between them. What I saw made my blood run cold. Men were moving cargo between the vehicles, not freight containers or legitimate merchandise, but people. Human beings were being transferred from the trucks to the cars, and from what I could see through my binoculars, many of them appeared to be women and children. They were moving slowly, like they were drugged or injured, and they were being handled roughly by men who clearly didn't care about their welfare. I grabbed my cell phone to call 911, but there was no signal. The remote location and hilly terrain had put me in one of those dead zones where modern communication simply doesn't work. My CB radio was picking up static and some distant chatter, but nothing from the truckers who were supposed to be right there in the parking lot with me. That's when I realized that those weren't legitimate truck drivers conducting legal business. They were criminals using commercial vehicles as cover for a human trafficking operation, and I had stumbled into the middle of it. I started to back my truck out of the parking space, planning to get back on the highway and drive until I found a location with cell phone coverage where I could contact law enforcement. But before I could complete the maneuver, one of the men near the central building spotted my movement and pointed in my direction. Within seconds, vehicles were moving to block the exit from the rest area. I was trapped. My CB radio crackled to life with a voice I didn't recognize. "Driver of the red Peterbilt,
Shut down your engine and step out of your vehicle. Keep your hands visible and don't try anything stupid." I looked around the parking lot and realized that I was completely surrounded. There had to be at least 15 men positioned around the various vehicles, and several of them were carrying what looked like military-style weapons. This wasn't just a trafficking operation. It was a heavily armed criminal enterprise that was prepared to use lethal force to protect their business. "I don't want any trouble," I said into the CB. "I'm just a driver trying to get around the accident on I-65. I'll leave right now and forget I ever saw this place." "Too late for that, friend. You've seen too much. Now shut down that engine and get out of the truck." Through my windshield, I could see men approaching my cab from multiple directions. They moved with military precision, covering each other's advance and communicating through hand signals. These weren't random criminals. They were organized, professional, and extremely dangerous. I had 3 choices: comply with their demands and hope they would let me go after questioning me, try to fight my way out through superior numbers and firepower, or attempt to use my truck as a weapon to break through their roadblock and escape. None of those options seemed likely to end well for me. The lead man reached my driver's side door and tapped on the window with the barrel of his rifle. He was tall and lean, wearing military-style clothing and body armor. His face was partially hidden by night vision goggles, but I could see enough to tell that he was completely serious about using that weapon if I didn't cooperate. "Last chance, driver. Engine off. Hands where we can see them." I turned off the ignition and slowly opened my door, keeping my movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Look, I don't know what kind of operation you're running here, but I'm not interested in causing problems. I'm just trying to make a living hauling freight." "That's what they all say," the man replied. "Climb down from the cab slowly." As I stepped down from my truck, I got a better look at what was happening in the rest area. The scene was even more disturbing up close than it had been through binoculars. Women and children were being sorted into different groups based on criteria I couldn't understand, then loaded into specific vehicles like merchandise being prepared for shipment. Most of the victims appeared to be Hispanic, probably undocumented immigrants who had been intercepted while trying to cross the border or reach relatives in northern cities. They were perfect targets for trafficking operations because they couldn't report crimes to law enforcement without risking deportation. But there were also victims who looked like American citizens, teenagers who could have been runaways, or children who had been abducted from their homes. The diversity of the victim pool suggested that this operation cast a wide net, taking people from multiple sources and consolidating them at locations like this rest area before distributing them to buyers across the country. "What's your name, driver?" the armed man asked. "Jake Morrison." "Well, Jake Morrison, you've got terrible timing. We're conducting some sensitive business here tonight, and we can't have witnesses driving away and making phone calls to the authorities." He gestured toward the central building. "Let's go inside and discuss your situation with my boss. Maybe we can work something out." As we walked toward the building, I tried to count the victims I could see in the parking lot. There had to be at least 30 people, ranging in age from maybe 8 years old to middle age. All of them showed signs of trauma, malnourishment, bruising, the hollow-eyed look of people who had given up hope. The building itself was a typical rest area facility. Concrete block construction with restrooms, vending machines, and a small information area with maps and tourist brochures. But it had been modified for criminal purposes. The windows were covered with plywood, additional locks had been installed on all the doors, and there were signs that the place was being used as a temporary holding facility for human cargo. Inside, a man in expensive clothing was talking on a satellite phone while consulting a laptop computer that displayed what looked like shipping schedules and route maps. He was older than the armed men, probably in his 50s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested he was the business manager rather than the muscle. When he saw me, he ended his phone call and closed the laptop. "Another curious trucker? Caught him watching the transfer from the back of the lot," my escort reported. Says he's just trying to get around the I-65 closure. The boss studied me for a moment. Jake Morrison from Detroit, driving for Morrison Freight Services. You're carrying transmission components for Ford Motor Company. Delivery scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow at their Louisville plant. My blood turned to ice. How did he know all that information about my load and my route? We do our homework on every truck that comes through this area, he said, answering my unspoken question. Most drivers are legitimate, just using the back roads to avoid problems on the interstates. But occasionally we get someone who's more interested in our operations than they should be. He walked over to a table where several firearms were laid out like tools. The question is, what kind of driver are you, Mr. Morrison? The kind who minds his own business and keeps driving? Or the kind who thinks he's a hero and tries to interfere with things he doesn't understand? I just want to deliver my load and go home to my family, I said honestly. Family? That's interesting. He picked up a pistol from the table and checked to make sure it was loaded. Wife and 2 children in suburban Detroit, mortgage, car payments, all the usual middle-class obligations. You've got a lot to lose if you make the wrong decision tonight. The casual mention of my family made me realize that these people had access to information that should have been private. They knew my home address, my family situation, my financial obligations. This wasn't just a criminal operation. It was a sophisticated organization with resources that rivaled those of law enforcement agencies. What do you want from me? I asked. That depends on how reasonable you're willing to be. You see, Mr. Morrison, you've stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple trafficking operation. What you're witnessing here is just one node in a network that spans the entire continental United States. We move people, weapons, drugs, and classified materials through a system that uses America's transportation infrastructure to hide criminal activity in plain sight. He gestured toward the parking lot where the transfer operation was continuing. Those trucks out there aren't driven by criminals. They're driven by legitimate commercial drivers who think they're hauling legal cargo. Just like you, they use back roads and alternate routes to avoid delays and inspections. The only difference is that some of them are carrying passengers they don't know about. Hidden compartments, modified trailers, false floors, refrigerated compartments that can be sealed and climate-controlled. A truck driver can haul 30 kidnapped immigrants and never know they're there, as long as he doesn't ask questions about why his trailer seems heavier than the manifest indicates. The implications of what he was telling me were staggering. If this organization was using unwitting truck drivers to transport victims across the country, then thousands of commercial vehicles could be involved in human trafficking without the drivers ever realizing it. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm going to offer you a choice, Mr. Morrison. You can continue to be an unwitting participant in our transportation network, or you can become a knowing participant with all the benefits and risks that entails. He set the pistol down on the table and pulled out a thick envelope. $50,000, cash. That's what we pay drivers who are willing to haul special cargo without asking questions. Your transmission components get delivered to Ford on schedule, but you also carry some additional passengers who need transportation to specific destinations. $50,000 was more than I made in a year driving for automotive companies. It was enough money to pay off my mortgage, put my kids through college, and set my family up for a comfortable future. All I had to do was ignore the fact that I would be transporting kidnapped people to destinations where they would be abused, exploited, or killed. And if I refuse, then you become a security risk that needs to be eliminated. Your truck gets driven off a cliff somewhere in the mountains. Your body gets buried in a location where it will never be found. And your family gets told that you died in a tragic accident while avoiding the I-65 closure. He picked up the pistol again. But let's not talk about unpleasant possibilities. Let's focus on the opportunity I'm presenting. $50,000 for one night's work, with the possibility of additional contracts if you prove reliable. Through the windows, I could see that the transfer operation was nearing completion. Victims were being loaded into the final vehicles, and the trucks that had brought them were being prepared to leave the rest area. Soon, this temporary hub would be empty again, just another forgotten rest stop on a back road that nobody used except lost travelers and criminals. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Time is the one thing we don't have. Those vehicles need to be on the road within the next 30 minutes to maintain their delivery schedules. Decision time, Mr. Morrison." I looked at the envelope full of cash, thought about my family's financial situation, considered the consequences of both accepting and refusing the offer. Either way, my life was about to change dramatically. Outside, engines were starting up as the trafficking convoy prepared to depart. Whatever choice I made in the next few seconds would determine not just my own fate, but potentially the fates of the 30 victims I had witnessed being transferred between vehicles. The boss checked his watch. 20 seconds, Mr. Morrison. What's it going to be?" I stared at the envelope of cash, my mind racing through the implications of both choices. $50,000 represented financial freedom for my family, but it also represented complicity in one of the most evil enterprises I had ever encountered. The faces of those victims in the parking lot flashed through my mind. Children who would never see their families again. Women who were being sold like livestock. People whose lives meant nothing to the organization that was offering to make me wealthy. "I'll do it," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. The boss smiled and handed me the envelope. "Excellent choice, Mr. Morrison. I had a feeling you were a practical man." He walked over to his laptop and pulled up what looked like a detailed shipping manifest. "Your additional cargo consists of 12 individuals who need transportation to a facility outside Nashville. They'll be loaded into a specially modified section of your trailer that you won't be able to access from the outside. As far as you're concerned, you're still just hauling transmission components to Louisville." "What happens to them in Nashville?" "That's not your concern. Your job is transportation, nothing more. Don't ask questions about origins, destinations, or what happens to the cargo after delivery. The less you know, the safer you are." One of his men entered the building and whispered something in his ear. The boss nodded and checked his watch again. "Loading is complete. Your truck has been modified and your additional passengers are secure. Here's a modified bill of lading that shows the increased weight as additional automotive parts. If anyone asks, you picked up a partial load at a Ford supplier in Indianapolis." He handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number on it. "Delivery instructions will be transmitted to you by CB radio once you're within 50 miles of Nashville. Use channel 23 and respond only to transmissions that begin with your truck number followed by the word Phoenix. Any deviation from the route or delivery schedule will result in immediate termination of our business relationship." The casual way he said termination made it clear he wasn't just talking about ending the contract. "One more thing," he continued. "Your cargo is equipped with monitoring devices that track location, temperature, and vibration. Any attempt to access the hidden compartment or tamper with the seals will trigger an automatic alert to our security team. They'll assume you've been compromised by law enforcement and respond accordingly." I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "How long until the next job?" "That depends on how smoothly this delivery goes. We have regular routes that need reliable drivers, but we only work with people who have proven their discretion and competence. Complete this run successfully, and you'll be eligible for our premium transportation contracts." As we walked back toward my truck, I could see that the other vehicles were already pulling out of the rest area. The entire transfer operation had taken less than an hour from start to finish, executed with military precision by people who had clearly done this many times before. My truck looked exactly the same from the outside, but I could feel a subtle difference in the way it rode as I climbed into the cab. The additional weight of 12 human beings was barely noticeable, but it was there, a constant reminder of the evil I was now transporting across state lines. "Drive safely, Mr. Morrison," the boss said as I started my engine. "Your cargo is extremely valuable, and we expect it to arrive in perfect condition."
I pulled out of the rest area and back onto State Route 46, following the same route that had brought me to this nightmare. But everything felt different now. Every mile marker I passed represented another mile I was carrying kidnapped people toward whatever fate awaited them in Nashville. Every other truck I saw on the highway made me wonder if their drivers were also unknowing participants in this transportation network. The weight of the cash envelope in my jacket pocket felt like a lead brick against my chest. $50,000 that I had earned by becoming an accessory to human trafficking. Money that would secure my family's future, but cost me my soul in the process. My CB radio crackled with normal truck driver chatter. Complaints about traffic, weather reports, warnings about speed traps and way stations. The mundane conversations of people doing honest work seemed surreal after what I had just experienced. I was now living in two worlds simultaneously. The normal world of commercial trucking and the shadow world of organized crime that used legitimate drivers as unwitting accomplices. About 2 hours into the drive, as I was passing through the outskirts of Bloomington, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A faint tapping sound, barely audible over the road noise and engine hum. It was coming from somewhere behind me, from the direction of my trailer. The tapping had a rhythm to it. 3 quick taps, pause, 3 more taps, pause, like someone trying to communicate in Morse code. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just cargo shifting or mechanical noise from the truck. But the pattern continued, persistent and deliberate. Someone in that hidden compartment was alive and conscious, trying to get my attention. The monitoring devices the boss had mentioned would detect any attempt to access the hidden compartment, but they might not be sophisticated enough to monitor audio communications. If I could establish some kind of contact with the victims without physically tampering with their prison, I might be able to gather information that could help law enforcement locate and shut down this operation. I keyed my CB radio to an unused channel and spoke in a low voice. If anyone can hear this transmission, tap 4 times. The tapping stopped for a moment, then resumed with 4 distinct knocks. Jesus, they could hear me. I'm going to ask yes or no questions. Tap once for yes, twice for no. Can you understand me? 1 tap. Are you injured? 2 taps. Are there 12 of you back there? 1 tap. Are there children with you? 1 tap, followed by several more rapid taps, as if multiple people were responding to that question. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. There were children in that hidden compartment, trapped in what was probably a space designed for cargo rather than human beings. They were conscious, aware of their situation, and trying to communicate with the one person who might be able to help them. But I was also trapped by the same system that held them prisoner. The monitoring devices would detect any attempt to free them, and the organization that had recruited me knew where my family lived. Even if I managed to save the victims in my trailer, there would be consequences that could destroy everything I cared about. Listen carefully, I said into the radio. I'm going to try to help you, but I need information first. Do you know where you came from? The tapping became more complex, as if someone was trying to spell out words using a simple code. It took me several minutes to realize they were using a basic alphabet system. 1 tap for A, 2 taps for B, and so on. The message they tapped out was, border. You came from the Mexican border? 1 tap. How long have you been traveling? This time the tapping spelled out, days. Days. These people had been trapped in various trucks and holding facilities for days, possibly weeks, as they were transported across the country through this criminal network. The rest area where I had encountered them was just one way station in a pipeline that moved human cargo from acquisition points to final destinations. Do you know where you're being taken? No. I'm driving toward Nashville. After that, I don't know what happens. The tapping stopped for a long moment.
then resumed with a message that broke my heart. "Help us." I wanted to pull over, break open that compartment, and free every single person back there, but I also knew that doing so would accomplish nothing except getting us all killed. The organization I was dealing with had resources, connections, and the willingness to use violence to protect their operation. They could track my truck, monitor my communications, and eliminate any threats to their business. "I'm going to try," I transmitted, "but I need you to stay quiet and stay hidden until I can figure out how to get help without getting us all killed." One tap. For the next hour, I drove in silence, trying to develop a plan that could save the victims without destroying my family. The criminal organization had made it clear that any betrayal would result in retaliation against my wife and children. They knew where we lived, where my kids went to school, where my wife worked. Even if I managed to alert law enforcement and rescue the people in my trailer, there was no guarantee that my family would be safe from revenge. But there had to be a way. Some method of getting help without revealing my identity or compromising my family's security. The victims in my trailer were counting on me to find a solution, and I couldn't live with myself if I delivered them to whatever horror awaited them in Nashville. My CB radio crackled with a new transmission on Channel 23. "Unit 47329 Phoenix, this is base control. Respond, please." Unit 47329 was my truck number. They were making contact earlier than expected, which probably meant something had changed in the delivery schedule. "This is Unit 47329. Go ahead, base control." "Change of plans. Your delivery location has been moved to coordinates that will be transmitted to your GPS unit momentarily. ETA is now 4 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. My GPS unit beeped and displayed new destination coordinates. Instead of Nashville, I was now heading to a location in rural Tennessee that wasn't near any major cities or highways, a more remote delivery point that would be harder for law enforcement to monitor or intercept. "Roger, base control. New ETA confirmed." The transmission ended, leaving me with the realization that whatever was going to happen to the people in my trailer was going to happen in less than 4 hours. If I was going to save them, I had to act soon. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The criminal organization had demonstrated sophisticated capabilities. They knew my personal information. They could modify trucks with hidden compartments. They had monitoring equipment and GPS tracking, and they could communicate through encrypted channels. This wasn't some amateur trafficking ring. This was a professional operation with resources that suggested connections to larger criminal enterprises, possibly even international organizations. The boss at the rest area had mentioned weapons and classified materials, along with human trafficking, which implied involvement in activities that went far beyond simple kidnapping. I thought about the other drivers I had seen at the rest area, the legitimate truckers who were unknowingly carrying human cargo in modified trailers. How many trucks were on the road right now, transporting victims who were trapped in hidden compartments, unable to escape or call for help? How many drivers like me had been recruited into this network, either willingly or through coercion? The scope of the operation was staggering. If they could modify commercial trucks and recruit professional drivers, they could move hundreds of victims across the country every month without detection. Law enforcement agencies would be looking for suspicious vehicles and criminal suspects, not legitimate commercial trucks driven by drivers with clean records and proper documentation. My CB radio crackled again with another transmission from the hidden compartment. The victims were tapping out a new message. Scared. I keyed the radio. "I know, I'm scared too, but I'm going to find a way to help you. Children sick." My heart sank. There were sick children in that compartment, probably suffering from dehydration, malnutrition, or injuries sustained during their capture and transport. They needed medical attention, not delivery to criminals who would exploit them further. How many children? The tapping spelled out 5. 5 children, ranging in age from maybe 8 to 14 based on what I had observed at the rest area. 5 innocent kids who had been torn away from their families and were now being shipped across the country like cargo. I had to make a decision: continue with the delivery and hope that someone else would eventually shut down this network, or take action now to save the lives that were literally in my hands. The GPS showed that I was still 2 hours away from the new delivery coordinates. 2 hours to figure out how to contact law enforcement without compromising my family's safety. 2 hours to develop a plan that could save 12 people without getting us all killed. As I drove through the darkness toward an unknown destination, I realized that the choice I had made at the rest area was just the beginning. The real test of my character was yet to come, and it would determine not just the fate of the victims in my trailer, but the kind of man I would be for the rest of my life. The tapping from the hidden compartment continued, a constant reminder that time was running out, and that 12 lives depended on the decisions I would make in the next 2 hours. "Hold on," I transmitted to them. "I'm going to find a way to save you." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The solution came to me as I was passing through a small town in southern Indiana, seeing a billboard advertisement for a local truck stop that promised 24-hour CB radio relay service. It was an old-fashioned service that some truck stops still offered. Drivers could use the facility's high-powered radio equipment to send messages to other locations when their own CB radios didn't have sufficient range. If I could get to a truck stop with that kind of equipment, I might be able to contact law enforcement without using my own radio or cell phone, both of which could be monitored by the criminal organization. An indirect communication method that wouldn't immediately trace back to my truck or my identity. The closest truck stop with relay service was about 30 miles off my current route, but I had enough time to make the detour without missing the revised delivery schedule. I altered course and headed for the facility, hoping that my GPS deviation wouldn't trigger immediate attention from the monitoring systems. 20 minutes later, I was pulling into the parking lot of Murphy's Truck Plaza, a sprawling complex that looked like it had been serving truckers since the 1970s. The main building was a long, low structure with neon signs advertising fuel, food, showers, and radio services available 24/7. I parked my rig near the back of the lot and walked quickly toward the main building, leaving my engine running in case I needed to make a quick escape. The weight of the envelope in my jacket pocket reminded me that I was now carrying evidence of my involvement in the trafficking operation. But I was more concerned about the 12 people trapped in my trailer who were counting on me to find help. The interior of Murphy's Truck Plaza was exactly what I expected. Fluorescent lighting, checkered linoleum floors, and the smell of diesel fuel mixed with coffee and fried food. A few truckers were sitting in the diner section, eating late dinners and reading newspapers. Behind the main counter, an elderly man with gray hair and thick glasses was monitoring several CB radio units. "You the radio operator?" I asked. "That's me. Name's Murphy, like it says on the sign. You need to send a message somewhere?" "I need to contact law enforcement, but I can't use my own radio or phone. It's complicated." Murphy studied my face for a moment, probably reading the stress and fear that I was trying to hide. After 30 years of dealing with truckers, he had probably seen every kind of crisis and emergency that could happen on the highway. "You in some kind of trouble, son?" I looked around to make sure no one else could hear our conversation. "I'm carrying cargo I didn't know about when I took the load. Human cargo. People who have been kidnapped and are being transported against their will." Murphy's expression darkened. "Jesus Christ. How many people?" 12, including children. They're trapped in a hidden compartment in my trailer, and I'm supposed to deliver them to criminals in Tennessee in about an hour and a half." "Why can't you just call 911? "Because the people who put them in my truck know where my family lives. They made it clear that any betrayal would result in retaliation against my wife and kids. I need to contact law enforcement in a way that can't be traced back to me." Murphy nodded grimly.
I've heard stories about this kind of thing. Truckers getting used as mules for human trafficking operations. Most of them never even know they're carrying people.
He walked over to his radio equipment and began adjusting dials and frequencies. I can patch you through to the Indiana State Police on an encrypted channel that won't identify your location or your radio equipment. But son, once you make this call, there's no going back. These people are going to come after you and your family no matter what. Then I better make sure law enforcement gets all of them before they can retaliate. Murphy keyed his radio and spoke into the microphone. Indiana State Police Dispatch, this is Murphy's Truck Plaza requesting emergency assistance for a Priority 1 situation involving human trafficking. I have a driver here who needs to report an ongoing crime. The response was immediate. This is ISP Dispatch. Put your driver on the channel. Murphy handed me the microphone. Go ahead, son. Tell them everything. For the next 10 minutes, I described everything I had witnessed at the rest area. The transfer operation, the criminal organization, the modified trucks, and the current location of 12 trafficking victims. The dispatcher asked detailed questions about locations, descriptions of vehicles and personnel, and the planned delivery coordinates in Tennessee. We are coordinating with FBI and Tennessee authorities, the dispatcher finally said. Stay on this channel and maintain your current route. Do not deviate from the delivery schedule or do anything that might alert the traffickers to law enforcement involvement. What about my family? These people know where we live. We're dispatching units to provide security for your family immediately. They'll be in protective custody within the hour. Murphy handed me a slip of paper with a radio frequency written on it. This is a secure law enforcement channel. They'll be monitoring your progress and coordinating the takedown operation. Just key your mic twice if you need to communicate without speaking. I thanked Murphy and headed back to my truck, my heart racing with a mixture of hope and terror. I had committed myself to a course of action that would either save 12 lives and shut down a criminal organization, or get all of us killed if the plan went wrong. As I climbed back into my cab, I could hear the faint tapping from the hidden compartment. The victims were still alive, still conscious, still hoping that someone would save them from whatever fate awaited them at the delivery point. I keyed my CB radio to the frequency Murphy had given me and transmitted 2 quick clicks to let law enforcement know I was back on the road and proceeding toward the delivery point. The response came back immediately in the form of 2 clicks, confirming that they were monitoring my progress. For the next hour, I drove through the darkness of rural Tennessee, following GPS coordinates that led me deeper into mountainous terrain where cell phone towers were sparse and law enforcement response times would be measured in hours rather than minutes. The perfect location for a criminal organization to conduct business without interference. My CB radio remained silent except for the occasional 2-click confirmation that law enforcement was still tracking my progress. But I could hear increased activity on the law enforcement frequency. Coded transmissions about unit positions, surveillance assets, and tactical preparations that suggested a major operation was being organized around my delivery. The tapping from the hidden compartment had become less frequent, which worried me. Either the victims were conserving their strength, or some of them were losing consciousness due to poor air circulation or medical problems. The children sick message from earlier haunted me as I imagined what those kids were going through in their cramped prison. 20 miles from the delivery coordinates, my regular CB radio crackled with a transmission from the criminal organization. Unit 47329 Phoenix, this is base control. You're approaching the final checkpoint. Reduce speed to 45 mph and watch for a dirt road marked with 3 orange reflectors on the right side. Turn there and proceed exactly 2.3 miles to the delivery point. Roger, base control. As I continued toward the checkpoint, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were other trucks on this remote highway, all heading in the same direction as me. At least 4 other big rigs, spaced about a mile apart, following the same route to what was apparently a major consolidation point for the trafficking network. This wasn't just a delivery. It was a convoy operation involving multiple trucks carrying multiple loads of human cargo. The scale of what was happening was far larger than I had imagined. I spotted the 3 orange reflectors and turned onto a narrow dirt road that wound through dense forest. My headlights illuminated trees and underbrush on both sides, but no signs of civilization or law enforcement presence. If the FBI and state police were planning an operation, they were keeping their surveillance assets well hidden. The road climbed steadily for about 2 miles before opening into a large clearing where several buildings were visible in my headlights. It looked like an abandoned logging operation that had been repurposed for criminal use. A series of warehouses, equipment sheds, and what appeared to be housing facilities spread across several acres. But what dominated the scene were the vehicles. Dozens of trucks, cars, and SUVs were arranged around the central buildings like a temporary city. Some were being loaded, others were being unloaded, and still others were simply parked in organized rows that suggested this was a regular operation rather than a one-time event. I followed the GPS coordinates to a loading dock where several men in military-style clothing were waiting. They directed me to back my trailer up to the dock, then immediately began working to access the hidden compartment where my passengers were trapped. "Jake Morrison?" one of them asked as I climbed down from my cab. "That's me." "Excellent work on your first run. No problems with law enforcement, no deviations from the route, cargo delivered in perfect condition. The boss is very impressed." He handed me another envelope, this one even thicker than the first. "Bonus payment for completing the delivery ahead of schedule. $75,000 total for one night's work." $75,000, more money than most people made in 2 years. All for transporting 12 kidnapped people to a place where they would probably be tortured and killed. The weight of the cash felt like a physical burden as I stuffed the envelope into my jacket. "What happens to them now?" I asked, nodding toward the loading dock where my passengers were being removed from the hidden compartment. "Not your concern. But if you're curious, they're headed to various facilities that specialize in different aspects of human resource management. Some for manual labor, some for entertainment venues, some for medical research. Market demand determines final placement. Human resource management, medical research, entertainment venues, clinical euphemisms for slavery, torture, and murder." As I watched, 12 people were carried out of my trailer on stretchers. They were unconscious, probably sedated for the final leg of their journey, but I could see that they were still breathing. Still alive, at least for now. 5 of them were children. "Your next assignment is ready if you're interested," the man continued. 3-day run from here to a facility in Arizona. Same type of cargo, but larger load. $200,000 for the complete delivery. $200,000. The kind of money that could set my family up for life, eliminate every financial worry we had ever faced. All I had to do was continue transporting kidnapped people to their deaths. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long. We have other drivers who are eager for premium assignments. This opportunity won't be available indefinitely." As we talked, I noticed movement in the tree line around the clearing. Subtle shifts in the shadows that could have been wind moving the branches, or could have been law enforcement personnel getting into position for an assault on the facility. My CB radio crackled with a transmission on the law enforcement frequency. "All units, target site confirmed. Multiple structures, approximately 50 vehicles, estimated 100 subjects on site. Begin approach phase on my command." The takedown was about to begin. "I need to move my truck away from the loading dock," I told the man. "Don't want to block access for the next delivery." "Good thinking. Park over there with the other outbound vehicles." I climbed back into my cab and started the engine, moving my truck to a position that would give me cover when the shooting started. Because there was definitely going to be shooting. I could see armed guards positioned around the perimeter of the facility, and men with automatic weapons patrolling between the buildings. As I parked my truck, I could see the 12 people I had transported being loaded into a van for transfer to their final destinations. In a few minutes, they would disappear forever into the criminal network that had been using America's highways as a pipeline for human trafficking. Unless the law enforcement operation succeeded in rescuing them. My radio crackled again. Unit 47329, this is command. Key your mic 3 times if you can safely exit your vehicle and take cover. I looked around the facility, counting guards and estimating their positions. There were at least 20 armed men visible, probably more in the buildings and patrol areas I couldn't see. When the assault began, this place would become a war zone. But I had to try to help the people I had delivered here. Even if it meant putting myself in danger, I couldn't just sit in my truck and watch while they were taken away to be murdered. I keyed my mic 3 times and climbed out of my cab, moving toward a concrete loading ramp that would provide cover from multiple directions. Around me, the normal activity of the facility continued. Criminals going about their business, completely unaware that federal agents were surrounding their operation. Then the night exploded in violence. Floodlights suddenly illuminated the entire clearing as dozens of law enforcement officers emerged from the tree line with weapons drawn. Loudspeakers crackled with commands. "FBI, everyone on the ground, drop your weapons!" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Automatic gunfire erupted from multiple positions as the criminals fought back against the assault. Vehicles exploded as officers targeted fuel tanks and ammunition storage areas. People ran in all directions, some trying to escape, others taking defensive positions behind trucks and buildings. I pressed myself against the concrete ramp as bullets whined overhead. Through the chaos, I could see the van containing my 12 passengers trying to navigate toward an escape route on the far side of the facility. If it reached the tree line, those people would disappear forever. I had to do something. I sprinted toward my truck, using the loading dock as cover from the crossfire. My keys were still in the ignition, and the engine was still running. If I could position my rig to block the van's escape route, law enforcement might be able to intercept it and rescue the victims. As I climbed into the cab, a bullet spiderwebbed my windshield, but I was already moving. I put the truck in gear and aimed it directly at the van, which was now about 50 yards away from reaching the forest road that would carry my passengers to their deaths. The van driver saw me coming and tried to swerve around my truck, but I anticipated his move and blocked him again. Behind us, the gunfight was intensifying as more law enforcement officers poured into the clearing from multiple directions. The van stopped, trapped between my truck and a concrete barrier. The driver jumped out and ran toward the tree line, abandoning his cargo in his desperation to escape. I could hear sirens approaching from the forest road, ambulances and additional law enforcement units responding to the scene. Within minutes, this facility would be completely surrounded and secured. But the fight wasn't over yet. I could see armed criminals moving toward the abandoned van, probably intending to eliminate the witnesses before law enforcement could reach them. If those 12 people were going to survive, someone needed to protect them until help arrived. I grabbed a tire iron from my toolbox and ran toward the van, knowing that I was probably about to die, but unable to live with myself if I didn't try to save the people I had helped transport to this nightmare. The first gunman rounded the corner of the van just as I reached the rear doors. We saw each other at the same moment, but I was closer to cover and swung the tire iron with all my strength, catching him in the temple and dropping him unconscious to the ground. His rifle clattered across the pavement as 2 more gunmen approached from the other side of the van. I grabbed the weapon and tried to remember everything I had ever learned about firearms from my brief military service 20 years ago. The rifle was an M16 variant with a full magazine. I flipped the safety off and aimed toward the approaching figures, hoping they would retreat rather than risk a firefight so close to their valuable cargo. "Stay back!" I shouted. "Law enforcement is already here. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live through this." Instead of retreating, they opened fire, forcing me to dive behind the van for cover. Bullets punched through the vehicle's thin metal skin, and I could hear the victims inside crying out in terror as their mobile prison became a battlefield. I returned fire, aiming for the muzzle flashes in the darkness. I had no idea if I hit anything, but the incoming fire stopped for a moment, giving me a chance to reach the van's rear doors. They were locked, but the tire iron made quick work of the mechanism. The doors swung open to reveal 12 people lying on stretchers inside the vehicle, the same 12 I had transported from Indiana, now unconscious but still breathing. "FBI, drop your weapons!" I looked up to see federal agents approaching from 3 directions, their rifles trained on me. For a moment I thought they were going to shoot me, but then one of them recognized me from the earlier radio communications. "You're the driver! Get away from the van!" I dropped the rifle and backed away as paramedics rushed forward to begin treating the victims. Around the clearing, the gunfire was dying down as law enforcement gained control of the facility. Most of the criminals had either been captured or killed, and the few survivors were surrendering rather than face overwhelming odds. An FBI agent approached me as I sat on the ground, trying to process what had just happened. "Jake Morrison?" I nodded. "Agent Sarah Collins, FBI. You did good work tonight. 12 people are going home to their families because of what you did." I looked at the paramedics working on the victims, checking vital signs and starting IV lines. All 12 were alive, and the medical personnel seemed confident that they would recover from their ordeal. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we shut down the rest of this network. The computers and records we've seized here will give us everything we need to identify the other facilities, the other drivers, and the people running this operation. This was the central hub. With it gone, the entire system collapses." She handed me a phone. "Call your family. Tell them they're safe and that you'll be home soon." As I dialed my wife's number, I realized that the nightmare was finally over. The criminal organization that had tried to use me as an unwitting accomplice had been destroyed. The victims had been rescued, and my family was safe from retaliation. But I also knew that I would never be the same. The things I had seen and done would haunt me for the rest of my life. The knowledge that similar operations were probably still running in other parts of the country would never let me rest completely easy. The highway would always be a different place for me now. Not just a means of making an honest living, but a potential pathway for evil. Every truck I passed, every rest area I entered, every load I hauled would carry the memory of those 12 people who had counted on me to save them. At least now, I knew that sometimes the right choice was worth any price you had to pay for it. 6 months later, I was sitting in a federal courthouse in Indianapolis, waiting to testify in the trial of 17 defendants charged with running one of the largest human trafficking operations in U.S. history. The raid on the Tennessee facility had been a devastating blow to their network, but as I would soon learn, it was far from the end of the story. Agent Sarah Collins found me in the witness waiting room, looking as tired as I felt. The investigation had consumed her life for the past half year, following leads across 12 states and coordinating with international law enforcement agencies. "How are you holding up, Jake? Been better? How many more of these trials are there going to be?" "This is the big one, the leadership trial. If we can get convictions here, the rest of the cases should fall into place through plea agreements." She sat down across from me, consulting a thick folder of documents. "But there's something you need to know before you testify." The tone in her voice made my stomach clench. "What kind of something?" "We've discovered that the Tennessee operation wasn't the central hub we thought it was. It was just one regional center in a much larger network. The computer records we seized there led us to facilities in Arizona, Texas, Florida, and California. All of them still operational, all of them still moving human cargo through the trucking system. I felt sick. Despite everything we had accomplished that night in Tennessee, despite the 12 people we had rescued, the network was still out there, still destroying lives. "How many trucks are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate?
Maybe 200 drivers nationwide who are either willing participants or unwitting accomplices. They're moving an estimated 3,000 victims per year through modified trailers, using routes and methods that make detection almost impossible. Agent Collins opened her folder and showed me surveillance photographs taken at truck stops across the country. Rest areas, fuel stations, and shipping facilities where human cargo was being transferred between vehicles, hidden in plain sight among legitimate commercial traffic. The defendants in this trial were just middle management. The people really running this operation have connections that go all the way to the top of organized crime families, corrupt politicians, and international trafficking syndicates. Taking down the Tennessee facility was like removing one tentacle from an octopus. So what was the point? Did we accomplish anything at all? We saved 12 lives, Jake. Never forget that. Those people are back with their families because of what you did, and we've gathered intelligence that's helping us identify other parts of the network. She pulled out another set of photographs, these showing truckers I didn't recognize. We've been tracking drivers who were recruited using the same methods they used on you. Premium payments for specialty loads, modified trailers with hidden compartments, routes that avoid inspection points. Most of them don't know what they're carrying, but some of them have figured it out and chosen to continue anyway. Have you approached any of them? Tried to flip them like you did with me? 3 drivers in the past 6 months. 2 of them agreed to cooperate with ongoing investigations. The third one... She paused, looking uncomfortable. The third one was found dead in his cab at a truck stop outside Phoenix. Single gunshot to the head, no witnesses, no suspects. The message was clear. The criminal organization was still active, still recruiting drivers, and still willing to kill anyone who threatened their operations. What about my family? Are we still in danger? You're all in the witness protection program until this is completely resolved. New identities, new locations, around-the-clock security. But Jake, I need to be honest with you. This could take years to fully shut down. Maybe decades. Before I could respond, a federal marshal appeared in the doorway. Mr. Morrison, they're ready for your testimony. The courtroom was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and family members of trafficking victims. The 17 defendants sat at a long table with their attorneys, all of them wearing suits that made them look like legitimate businessmen rather than the criminals I knew them to be. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Amanda Foster, led me through my testimony step by step. The recruitment at the rest area, the threats against my family, the delivery of human cargo, the rescue operation in Tennessee. Every detail of that nightmare night was entered into evidence, along with photographs, radio recordings, and financial records that documented the scope of the criminal enterprise. The defense attorneys tried to portray me as a willing participant who had turned state's evidence only to avoid prison time. But the prosecution had evidence that supported my version of events. The cash payments, the threats, the modified trailer, everything corroborated my testimony that I had been coerced into participating. What emerged during the trial was a picture of criminal sophistication that exceeded anything I had imagined. The trafficking network used legitimate trucking companies as fronts, corrupted vehicle inspection officials, bribed law enforcement officers, and maintained safe houses in dozens of cities where victims could be held between transport phases. They had recruiters working truck stops and CB radio networks, identifying drivers who were financially desperate or morally flexible. They had mechanics who specialized in creating hidden compartments that could pass casual inspections. They had logistics coordinators who planned routes to avoid detection and maintained schedules that rivaled legitimate shipping companies. But the most chilling testimony came from the victims themselves. Men, women, and children who had been bought and sold like livestock, transported across the country in conditions that barely sustained life, then delivered to buyers who used them for forced labor, sexual exploitation, or medical experimentation. One victim, a 15-year-old girl named Maria, described being held in a hidden trailer compartment for 3 days without food or water
while being transported from Texas to Tennessee. She had listened to the truck driver's CB radio conversations, hearing him discuss weather and traffic with other truckers while she and 11 other people slowly suffocated in their mobile prison. "He seemed like a nice man on the radio," she testified through an interpreter. "He was talking about his children, about wanting to get home to his family. I kept thinking that if I could just make him hear me, he would help us. But he never knew we were there." That testimony hit me hard because I realized it could have described me during any of the loads I had hauled over 13 years of trucking. How many times had I driven trucks with hidden compartments? How many victims had listened to my CB conversations while trapped just a few feet behind me? The trial lasted 3 weeks. In the end, all 17 defendants were convicted on multiple counts of human trafficking, kidnapping, and racketeering. The sentences ranged from 25 years to life in prison. But as we left the courthouse after the verdict, Agent Collins reminded me that this was just the beginning. "These were regional managers and logistics coordinators," she said. "The real bosses are still out there, probably already rebuilding their network with new personnel and new methods. What can we do about it? Keep investigating, keep gathering intelligence, keep rescuing victims one operation at a time. It's not glamorous work, and it's never finished, but it's the only way to fight this kind of crime." 6 months after the trial, I received a phone call from Agent Collins. I was living under a new identity in a small town in Montana, working for a local construction company and trying to rebuild my life. "Jake, we need your help again." "What kind of help?" "We've identified another hub facility, this one in New Mexico, but the only way to get inside is with a driver they trust, someone who has a track record with their organization." "You want me to go undercover again?" "The intelligence we've gathered suggests they're moving children specifically now, kids taken from border detention facilities, foster homes, and refugee camps. Hundreds of them, Jake, maybe thousands." I thought about Maria's testimony, about the 12 people I had rescued in Tennessee, about all the victims who were still out there waiting for someone to hear their cries for help. When do we start? The operation took another 8 months to plan and execute. This time I was working with an international task force that included agents from Mexico, Canada, and several European countries. The trafficking network had evolved, adapting to law enforcement pressure by becoming more international and more sophisticated. The New Mexico facility was even larger than the Tennessee operation, a complex of buildings disguised as an agricultural processing plant, complete with legitimate employees who had no idea what was happening in the secure sections of the complex. The hidden areas contained holding cells for hundreds of victims, medical facilities for conditioning them for sale, and shipping departments that coordinated deliveries to buyers around the world. The rescue operation saved 347 people, including 198 children. The oldest victim was 62. The youngest was 6 years old. They came from 23 countries and had been held for periods ranging from days to years. But even that massive success felt incomplete when I learned that the network had simply shifted operations to other locations. Within weeks of the New Mexico raid, law enforcement agencies were tracking increased activity at facilities in Nevada, Wyoming, and North Dakota. It's been 3 years since that first night at the rest area in Indiana when I stumbled into the world of human trafficking. In that time, I've participated in 7 undercover operations, helped rescue over 800 victims, and testified in dozens of trials that have resulted in hundreds of convictions. But I've also learned that this is a war that may never be won completely. For every facility we shut down, 2 more open somewhere else. For every trafficker we arrest, 3 more are recruited to take their place. The demand for human slaves is apparently endless, and there will always be criminals willing to supply that demand. The trucking industry has implemented new security measures, random trailer inspections, enhanced background checks for drivers, monitoring systems that track unusual route patterns. But the criminals adapt faster than law enforcement can respond. They use newer technology, more sophisticated methods, and increasingly brutal techniques to maintain their operations. I still drive trucks sometimes, working for law enforcement agencies that need someone who understands both the legitimate trucking industry and its criminal counterparts. But I can never go back to the innocent world I lived in for 13 years, when I thought the worst thing I might encounter on the highway was a mechanical breakdown or bad weather. Now I know that America's highways carry more than freight and passengers. They carry a hidden cargo of human suffering that most people never suspect exists. Every truck stop is a potential transfer point. Every rest area is a possible crime scene. Every driver is either a potential victim or a potential accomplice. The network is still out there, still growing, still destroying lives one shipment at a time. And somewhere tonight, there's a trucker like I used to be, honest, hardworking, trying to make a living, who's about to receive a CB radio call that will change everything. Maybe he'll make the right choice. Maybe he'll find the courage to do what needs to be done, no matter what it costs him personally. Or maybe he'll take the money and deliver his cargo without asking questions, adding another dozen victims to a pipeline of human misery that stretches across the entire continent. The choice is always there, waiting on America's highways. The only question is whether we have the moral strength to make the right one when our turn comes. Because eventually, for every driver on the road, that turn will come. My name is Rick Thompson, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for 19 years. In all that time, I thought I understood the rhythm of America's highways. The ebb and flow of traffic, the patterns of weather and road construction, the unspoken rules that keep millions of vehicles moving safely across thousands of miles every day. I was wrong. There are predators out here who have turned our interstate system into their personal hunting ground, and I didn't realize how close I had come to becoming prey until it was almost too late. It was a cold February night when I was hauling a load of frozen foods from a distribution center in Omaha to a grocery chain warehouse in Denver. The weather forecast had been calling for light snow, but as I crossed the Nebraska-Colorado border on Interstate 76, the storm was developing into something much more serious. Visibility was dropping fast, and the wind was starting to push my rig around like it was a toy truck. I had been driving for about 10 hours and was getting close to my mandatory rest period when I saw the truck stop ahead. Miller's Travel Plaza was one of those old-fashioned facilities that had been serving drivers since the 1960s. Fuel pumps, a diner, showers, and enough parking for maybe 30 trucks. Not fancy, but clean and reliable. As I pulled into the lot, I noticed there were only a handful of other rigs parked there, which was unusual for a Friday night. Most truck stops would be packed with drivers taking their weekly 34-hour restart, but apparently the weather was keeping traffic light. I parked near the back of the lot and did my usual post-trip inspection, checking lights, tires, and load securement. The snow was coming down harder now, and the wind was howling across the high plains with the kind of intensity that could turn a routine drive into a survival situation. Inside the Travel Plaza, the diner was nearly empty except for an elderly waitress named Dolores and two other truckers who were nursing coffee and reading newspapers. I ordered a cheeseburger and fries, grabbed a cup of coffee, and settled into a booth near the window where I could keep an eye on my truck. That's when the CB radio clipped to my belt crackled to life with a transmission that made my blood run cold. Breaker 19, this is Nightcrawler looking for any drivers on I-76 westbound. You boys need to be real careful out there tonight. We got ourselves a problem. I recognized the voice. Nightcrawler was an old-timer named Carl Hensley, who had been driving these routes for over 30 years. He wasn't the type to spread rumors or get spooked by normal road hazards. I grabbed my radio. Nightcrawler, this is Rocky Mountain Rick. What kind of problem are we talking about? Rick, good to hear your voice, brother. Listen up. There's been 3 trucks found abandoned on I-76 in the past 2 weeks. All of them between the Colorado border and Denver. Drivers are missing, loads intact, no signs of mechanical problems. 3 missing drivers. That was not the kind of problem you typically heard about on the CB networks. Truckers went missing for all sorts of reasons. Medical emergencies, family crises, financial problems that made them want to disappear. But 3 drivers on the same stretch of highway in 2 weeks suggested something more sinister. Any word from law enforcement? I asked. Colorado State Police are investigating, but they're calling them voluntary disappearances. Say there's no evidence of foul play. But Rick, I knew 2 of those drivers personally, Johnny Martinez and Dave Peterson. Neither one of them would abandon their trucks willingly, especially not with valuable loads that could get them sued by their insurance companies. I looked out the window at the snowstorm that was intensifying by the minute. The idea of predators hunting truckers on an isolated highway in weather like this was the stuff of nightmares. What do you think happened to them? I got my theories, but nothing I can prove. All I know is that 3 good drivers have vanished without a trace, and I'm hearing rumors about other incidents on highways across the region. Somebody's targeting truckers, Rick, and they're damn good at it. The transmission ended, leaving me staring out at the parking lot where my truck sat covered in accumulating snow. 3 missing drivers. No evidence of foul play. Valuable loads left intact, which ruled out hijacking as a motive. Someone was hunting truckers for reasons that had nothing to do with stealing cargo. I finished my meal and headed back to my truck, planning to get some sleep before continuing toward Denver in the morning. But as I approached my rig, I noticed something that made me stop cold. There were footprints in the snow around my trailer. Fresh ones made within the past few minutes while I had been inside the diner. Someone had been examining my truck, walking completely around it, checking the doors and load securement. I looked around the parking lot, but saw no one who could have made those tracks. The other truckers were still inside the diner, and the travel plaza was closed except for fuel sales. Whoever had been inspecting my truck had disappeared into the storm. I climbed into my cab and locked the doors, suddenly feeling vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced in 19 years of driving. The footprints could have been made by anyone. Another driver checking out my load, a security guard making his rounds, even someone from the Travel Plaza staff. But the pattern of the tracks bothered me. They weren't random or casual. They formed a deliberate circuit around my entire rig, the kind of methodical inspection that someone would make if they were planning to do something to my truck. My CB radio crackled again with another transmission from Nightcrawler. Any drivers still monitoring this channel? I just got word of another abandoned truck, found about an hour ago on a rest area off I-25 south of Cheyenne. Driver missing, load intact, no signs of struggle. 4 missing drivers now, all of them on highways in the Colorado-Wyoming region, all of them within the past 2 weeks. I was starting to think that Miller's Travel Plaza might not be the safe haven I had assumed it was. I tried to start my engine, but nothing happened. The starter clicked once, then silence. I tried again with the same result. After 19 years of driving, I knew the sound of a truck that wasn't going to start, and this was it. But my truck had been running perfectly when I parked it less than an hour ago. The engine was warm, the batteries were good, and I had just filled the fuel tanks in Omaha. There was no mechanical reason why it shouldn't start, unless someone had tampered with it while I was inside the diner. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed back out to inspect the engine compartment. What I found there confirmed my worst fears. Someone had disconnected the battery cables and removed several critical fuses from the electrical system. My truck had been deliberately disabled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I was stranded at Miller's Travel Plaza in the middle of a snowstorm, and someone was hunting truckers on this very stretch of highway. I pulled out my cell phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The remote location and severe weather had put me in a dead zone where modern communication simply didn't work. My CB radio was my only link to the outside world, but broadcasting a distress call would also advertise my vulnerable position to anyone monitoring the channels, including whoever had disabled my truck. I climbed back into my cab and tried to think through my options. I could try to fix the sabotage myself, but that would require working outside in the storm where I would be completely exposed to attack. I could wait until morning and hope that other drivers would arrive to provide assistance, but there was no guarantee that help would come before my unknown enemy made their move. Or I could go back inside the travel plaza and wait this out among other people, hoping that safety in numbers would protect me until the weather cleared and I could get my truck repaired. But as I looked toward the diner, I realized that might not be an option either. The lights inside had gone out while I was inspecting my engine. The entire travel plaza was now dark except for a few security lights in the parking lot. Either the power had failed due to the storm, or someone had deliberately cut the electricity to isolate me from potential help. My CB radio crackled with a new transmission, but this time the voice was unfamiliar, cold, calm, and somehow predatory. "Rocky Mountain, Rick. I know you can hear me. We need to have a conversation." I grabbed the handset, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching you for a while now. Someone who knows all about your routes, your schedule, your habits. You're a very predictable driver, Rick. That's going to make this so much easier." "Make what easier?" The voice chuckled, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen pond. "The hunt, of course. You see, Rick, I collect truckers. I've been doing it for years, perfecting my methods, learning how to select the right targets and eliminate them without leaving evidence that law enforcement can use. 4 missing drivers. This was the man responsible for their disappearances, and now I was his next target. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to play a game, Rick. A simple game with simple rules. I give you a head start, and you try to survive until sunrise. If you make it through the night, you win, and I let you go. If I catch you before dawn, well, let's just say you'll be joining Johnny Martinez and Dave Peterson in a place where truckers go to rest forever." Through my windshield, I could see movement in the tree line that bordered the travel plaza. Dark shapes moving between the pine trees, circling the parking lot like wolves preparing to attack. "You're insane." "I'm efficient, Rick. I'm also very good at what I do. In 3 years of collecting truckers, I've never had one escape. Tonight might be different, though. You seem smarter than most of my previous acquisitions." I looked at my disabled truck, at the dark travel plaza, at the storm that was cutting me off from any possibility of rescue. I was trapped in the middle of nowhere with a serial killer who hunted truckers for sport. What happened to the other drivers? Johnny and Dave? They provided excellent entertainment before they died. Johnny lasted almost 6 hours before I caught him in an abandoned barn about 10 miles from here. Dave made it through most of the night, but he got careless near dawn and walked into a trap I had set near the highway. The casual way he described murdering 2 men I had worked with for years made me sick. These weren't random crimes of opportunity. They were calculated executions carried out by someone who had turned killing into a hobby. The game starts in exactly 10 minutes, Rick. That gives you time to grab whatever supplies you think you'll need and start running. I recommend you dress warmly. It's going to be a long, cold night. And if I refuse to play your game, then I kill you right now, quickly and efficiently. But where's the fun in that? I much prefer the traditional hunt. Predator and prey, survival of the fittest, man against man in the most primitive contest imaginable. Through my mirrors, I could see more movement around the parking lot. This killer wasn't working alone. He had help, probably other psychopaths who shared his twisted interest in hunting human beings. 10 minutes, Rick. Use them wisely. The transmission ended, leaving me alone with the knowledge that I was about to become the quarry in a deadly game that I had no chance of winning. Even if I could survive the night in a blizzard, even if I could evade trained killers who knew the terrain, I had nowhere to run and no way to call for help. But I had to try. Somewhere out there in the Colorado wilderness, The remains of Johnny Martinez and Dave Peterson were buried in unmarked graves, testament to what happened to truckers who fell into this monster's trap. I wasn't going to join them without a fight. I grabbed my winter jacket, my flashlight, and the tire iron from my toolbox. Not much in the way of weapons, but better than nothing. I also took the emergency food and water I kept in my cab for situations exactly like this one. As I prepared to leave the relative safety of my truck, I keyed my CB radio one more time. Mayday, Mayday. This is Rocky Mountain Rick to any drivers monitoring this channel. I'm at Miller's Travel Plaza on I-76 and I'm being hunted by the person who killed Johnny Martinez and Dave Peterson. If anyone hears this, contact law enforcement immediately. The response came from my hunter, his voice filled with amusement. No one's listening, Rick. I've been jamming the CB frequencies for the past hour. It's just you and me now, alone in the wilderness where predators and prey have been dancing their eternal dance since the beginning of time. I looked at my watch. 8 minutes until the hunt began. 8 minutes to figure out how to survive until sunrise against a killer who had never lost this game before. I used those 8 minutes to study the terrain around Miller's Travel Plaza through my windshield and mirrors. The facility sat in a shallow valley surrounded by rolling hills covered with pine forest. Interstate 76 ran along the northern edge of the property, while a network of ranch roads and fire trails disappeared into the wilderness to the south and west. My best chance for survival lay in reaching the highway and flagging down another vehicle, but that would mean crossing open ground where I would be completely exposed. The alternative was to head into the forest where I might find better concealment, but where I could also become hopelessly lost in terrain that my hunter knew better than I did. With 2 minutes left on the countdown, I made my decision. I would head for the tree line south of the Travel Plaza, then work my way west toward a ranch road I had noticed on my GPS. If I could reach that road and follow it north, I might eventually intersect with another highway where I could find help. It was a long shot, but it was better than trying to outrun trained killers across open ground in a blizzard. Time's up, Rick. The voice came through my CB radio with the cold certainty of death. I grabbed my supplies, took one last look at the truck that had been my home and office for the past 5 years, then opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical blow, driving snow into my face and making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The temperature had dropped to at least 10 below zero, and the wind chill made it feel even colder. I had maybe 4 hours before hypothermia would start affecting my judgment and motor skills. I ran toward the tree line as fast as the deep snow would allow, expecting to hear gunshots or shouts from my pursuers at any moment. But the only sounds were the howling wind and the crunch of my boots breaking through the snow crust. I made it to the edge of the forest without being spotted, but I knew that wouldn't last long. My footprints were clearly visible in the snow, creating a trail that even an amateur tracker could follow. I needed to find a way to obscure my path or create false leads that would confuse my hunters. The forest was a mix of pine trees and aspen groves, with occasional clearings where fallen logs and granite outcroppings created natural obstacles. I stuck to the areas with the densest tree coverage, hoping the canopy would reduce the snow accumulation and make my tracks less obvious. About a quarter mile into the woods, I heard the first sound of pursuit. Voices calling to each other through the storm, coordinating a search pattern that would systematically cover the entire forest. There were at least 3 different speakers, which meant I was being hunted by a team rather than an individual killer. I changed direction, heading due west instead of following my original plan to angle northwest toward the ranch road. If they were tracking my footprints, the sudden course change might buy me a few extra minutes while they figured out my new heading. The going was tough through the deep snow and fallen timber, but I was in decent physical condition from 19 years of manual labor. The real problem was the cold. My face was already starting to go numb, and I could feel ice crystals forming in my beard from my frozen breath. 20 minutes into my flight, I found what I was looking for. a small creek that was still flowing despite the freezing temperatures. If I could follow the water for a few hundred yards, I might be able to break my trail and emerge in a location where my pursuers wouldn't expect to find me. I stepped into the creek, gasping as the icy water filled my boots and soaked through my socks. The current was swift enough to prevent ice from forming, but walking in the stream bed was treacherous. Smooth rocks covered with a thin layer of ice made every step a potential disaster. I followed the creek west for about 10 minutes before climbing out onto a rocky area where my boots wouldn't leave clear prints in the snow. From there, I headed toward a ridgeline that might give me a better view of the surrounding terrain and help me orient myself toward civilization. But as I climbed toward the ridge, I realized I had made a tactical error. The rocky area that had seemed perfect for hiding my tracks was also the most exposed part of the landscape. I was silhouetted against the sky, visible from multiple directions to anyone with night vision equipment. A rifle shot cracked through the night, and a bullet whined past my head close enough that I could feel the air displacement. I dove behind a boulder as 2 more shots chipped granite inches from where I had been standing. "Very good, Rick." The killer's voice echoed across the valley from somewhere below my position. "You're much more resourceful than Johnny or Dave. They both tried to hide in the forest like scared rabbits. But you're thinking tactically, using the terrain to your advantage." I stayed low behind the boulder, trying to pinpoint the location of his voice. He seemed to be about 200 yards southeast of my position, probably using a rifle scope with thermal imaging to track my heat signature through the falling snow. "You're wondering how I can see you so clearly in this storm," he continued, as if reading my thoughts. "Military surplus night vision equipment, my friend. I spent 20 years in special operations before I retired to pursue more interesting hobbies. Hunting deer and elk got boring after a while. They don't fight back with the same creativity that humans do." A former Special Forces soldier with military training and equipment. That explained the tactical sophistication and the casual reference to killing as a hobby. This wasn't some deranged amateur. This was a professional killer who had turned his military skills toward hunting human beings. "I know what you're thinking, Rick. You're wondering if you can circle around and take me by surprise, maybe get close enough to use that tire iron you brought as a weapon. It's a good plan, but it won't work. My associates have positioned themselves to cover all the approaches to my location." As if to prove his point, muzzle flashes erupted from 2 other positions on either side of the valley. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around me, coming from angles that would have been impossible if there had been only one shooter. I was trapped on the ridge with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. In less than an hour, the hunters had managed to corner me in terrain where they held every advantage. "You're probably wondering why we do this," the killer said, his voice carrying clearly through the thin mountain air. "Why we hunt truckers instead of easier targets like hikers or campers." I keyed my CB radio, hoping against hope that someone might be monitoring the channel despite his claims about jamming the frequencies. "This is Rocky Mountain Rick. I'm being hunted by killers at Miller's Travel Plaza on I-76. If anyone can hear this, contact law enforcement immediately." Nothing but static in response. "Truckers are perfect prey, Rick. You're isolated for long periods, you follow predictable routes, and when you disappear, it takes days or weeks before anyone notices. Most importantly, you're tough. You don't break easily under pressure, which makes the hunt more challenging and entertaining." Another rifle shot forced me to press myself closer to the boulder. They weren't trying to kill me quickly. They were hurting me, pushing me toward some predetermined location where they could control the final phase of their hunt. Johnny Martinez lasted 6 hours before we caught him. He was good, used every trick he could think of to evade capture. But in the end, he made the same mistake they all make. He tried to hide instead of fighting. I thought about Johnny, a driver I had known for over 10 years, a family man with 3 children who had always been willing to help other truckers in trouble. He had died alone in these mountains, hunted like an animal by psychopaths who killed for entertainment.
Dave Peterson was even more impressive. He actually managed to wound one of my associates with an improvised weapon. But he got overconfident near dawn and walked into an ambush we had prepared near the highway. Dave had been a Vietnam veteran, tough as nails and smarter than most people gave him credit for. If he couldn't escape these killers, what chance did I have? The beauty of our hunting ground is that it's completely isolated, the killer continued. We've been using this area for 3 years now, and law enforcement has never even suspected that the missing truckers are connected. They assume you're just another driver who decided to abandon his rig and start a new life somewhere else. I looked at my watch. It was just past midnight, at least 6 hours until sunrise. Even if I could somehow evade capture until dawn, I would be fighting hypothermia and exhaustion while being pursued by well-equipped killers who knew every square mile of this wilderness. My CB radio crackled with a new transmission, but this time it wasn't from my hunter. It was from Nightcrawler, the old-timer who had warned me about the missing drivers. Rocky Mountain Rick, if you're still alive out there, I got your Mayday call. Took me a while to figure out how to break through the jamming, but I'm broadcasting on multiple frequencies now. Colorado State Police are en route to your location. The killer's voice immediately cut in, filled with irritation for the first time since the hunt had begun. Clever, Rick. I didn't think anyone would be able to penetrate my electronic countermeasures. But it doesn't matter. Law enforcement is at least an hour away, and you'll be dead long before they arrive. At least an hour. I had to survive for at least an hour against professional killers in terrain where I had no advantages and no escape routes. The odds were impossible, but Nightcrawler's transmission had given me something I hadn't had before. Hope. You hear that, boys? I called out into the darkness. Law enforcement is coming. Maybe it's time for you to cut your losses and find a new hunting ground. Harsh laughter echoed from multiple positions around the valley. We've been planning to relocate anyway, Rick. Too many missing drivers in one area tends to attract attention eventually. Consider yourself our farewell performance in Colorado. More gunshots erupted from different positions, the muzzle flashes creating a deadly constellation around my location on the ridge. They were closing in, tightening their perimeter, preparing for the final phase of their hunt. I had two choices: stay hidden behind the boulder until they overran my position, or make a break for different terrain where I might have better options for evading capture. Either choice would probably result in my death, but at least if I kept moving, I might buy enough time for law enforcement to arrive. I took a deep breath, gripped my tire iron like a weapon, and prepared to run for my life through a Colorado blizzard while being hunted by the most dangerous predators on America's highways. The game was far from over, but I was running out of moves. I waited for the next muzzle flash to reveal the position of the closest hunter, then sprinted away from the boulder in the opposite direction. Rifle shots cracked behind me as I ran down the steep slope, using gravity and desperation to build speed through the deep snow. My plan was to reach the bottom of the valley and follow the creek downstream, hoping to find more defensible terrain or maybe even a way back to the highway. But as I crashed through the underbrush and fallen timber, I realized the killers had anticipated this move. They were driving me toward something, a specific location where they wanted the hunt to end. The creek I had followed earlier wound through the valley floor in a series of switchbacks, creating natural choke points where a single rifleman could control a large area. I was being herded like livestock toward a slaughter pen that had probably been prepared in advance. But I didn't have any other options. The ridge behind me was controlled by at least 2 shooters with night vision equipment, and the slopes on either side of the valley were too steep to climb in the deep snow. I had to keep moving forward and hope I could find some way to turn the tables on my pursuers. The going was easier along the creek, but also more dangerous. The open water hadn't frozen completely, but ice shelves extended from both banks, creating treacherous footing that could dump me into the frigid stream if I wasn't careful. Hypothermia would kill me just as surely as a bullet, but a lot more slowly. About half a mile downstream from where I had left the ridge, I found what I was looking for:
a place where a massive pine tree had fallen across the creek, creating a natural bridge. More importantly, the root system had been torn from the ground when the tree fell, leaving a crater that was now filled with snow and debris. It wasn't much of a defensive position, but it was better than running through open terrain while being shot at by hunters with superior equipment and training. I climbed into the crater and used my hands to dig out a fighting position that would give me some protection from rifle fire. The frozen ground was hard as concrete, but the snow and debris gave me enough cover to conceal my heat signature from thermal imaging equipment. My CB radio crackled with another transmission from Nightcrawler.
Rick, Colorado State Police report they're about 20 minutes out from your location. Can you hold on that long? 20 minutes. I had been running for over an hour, and my body was starting to shut down from the cold and exhaustion. My fingers were so numb I could barely grip the tire iron, and my feet had lost all feeling despite the waterproof boots. But 20 minutes was achievable if I could find a way to keep the killers at a distance until help arrived. I'm in a defensive position along the creek about half a mile south of the travel plaza, I transmitted. Multiple hostiles with military equipment and training. They've been hunting truckers for years. Copy that, Rick. State police are coordinating with federal authorities now that we know this is a serial killing operation. Just stay alive for 20 more minutes. The killer's voice cut in immediately, filled with cold amusement. 20 minutes, Rick? That's optimistic. You see, we've been preparing this hunting ground for 3 years. Every trail, every hiding place, every possible escape route has been mapped and prepared for exactly this situation. As if to prove his point, I heard the sound of engines starting up somewhere in the distance. Snowmobiles, from the high-pitched whine of their two-stroke motors. They were bringing mechanized pursuit into a hunt that had already been completely one-sided. You've given us excellent sport tonight, Rick. Much better than Johnny or Dave, but all good things must come to an end. The snowmobile engines grew louder as they approached my position. I could see their headlights cutting through the storm, moving in a coordinated pattern that would surround the creek and eliminate any possibility of escape. I keyed my radio again. Nightcrawler, they have snowmobiles. I'm about to be overrun. Hang on, Rick. I'm monitoring state police frequencies, and they're close, real close. But not close enough. The first snowmobile appeared through the trees about 200 yards upstream from my position, its headlights sweeping back and forth as the rider searched for targets. A second machine emerged from the forest on the opposite side of the creek, and a third was approaching from downstream. They had me completely surrounded. The lead rider spotted my position and opened fire with what sounded like a fully automatic weapon. Bullets chewed up the frozen ground around my fighting hole, forcing me to press myself against the bottom of the crater while chunks of ice and debris rained down on top of me. I had maybe 30 seconds before they closed in close enough to get clean shots at my position. The tire iron in my hands felt pathetically inadequate against military weapons and trained killers, but it was all I had. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Helicopter rotors cutting through the storm wind. A searchlight suddenly illuminated the entire valley, and a voice boomed across the landscape through a powerful loudspeaker. "This is Colorado State Police. Drop your weapons and lie face down on the ground." The snowmobiles immediately scattered, their riders recognizing that the hunt had suddenly shifted in my favor. But they didn't retreat. Instead, they began shooting at the helicopter, forcing it to climb higher and reducing the effectiveness of its searchlight. I could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions around the valley as the killers engaged law enforcement in a firefight that turned the peaceful wilderness into a war zone. The helicopter circled overhead, its searchlight sweeping back and forth while ground units moved in from multiple directions. But the killers weren't finished with me yet. The lead snowmobile rider dismounted about 50 yards from my position and began working his way toward the creek on foot, using the fallen tree as cover while his associates provided suppressing fire. He was good, moving in short rushes between cover points,
never exposing himself for more than a few seconds at a time. Military training was evident in every movement as he closed the distance between us. I waited until he was almost close enough to throw the tire iron, then raised my head above the rim of the crater and hurled it as hard as I could. The heavy steel tool caught him in the chest, knocking him backward into the snow, but he recovered quickly and brought his rifle up to fire. That's when a state trooper's rifle cracked from somewhere in the tree line. The killer jerked once and then lay still, his blood spreading across the white snow in a dark stain that looked black in the helicopter's searchlight. "This is Trooper Williams, Colorado State Police," a voice called out. "Are you Rick Thompson?" "That's me," I shouted back, climbing out of my fighting position with my hands raised. "The killers have snowmobiles and automatic weapons." "We can see that. Stay where you are and keep your head down. This isn't over yet." The gunfight continued for another 10 minutes as law enforcement closed in on the remaining killers. 2 more snowmobiles were stopped by rifle fire, their riders either killed or wounded badly enough to surrender. But at least one machine escaped into the forest, carrying survivors who would probably try to set up their hunting operation in a different location. When the shooting finally stopped, I counted 4 bodies in the snow around the creek. 4 killers who would never hunt truckers again, but an unknown number who had escaped to continue their deadly hobby somewhere else. Paramedics reached my position about 20 minutes later, checking me for hypothermia and gunshot wounds. I was cold, exhausted, and traumatized, but physically uninjured. The real damage was psychological. The knowledge that there were predators out there who had turned America's highways into their personal hunting preserve. "How many victims were there?" I asked the FBI agent who interviewed me at the hospital. "We're not sure yet. We found remains at 3 different locations in the mountains, but there could be more. These people were operating for at least 3 years, possibly longer." 3 years. Johnny Martinez and Dave Peterson were just the most recent victims in a killing spree that had probably claimed dozens of truckers who had simply vanished without a trace on remote highways. "What about the ones who escaped?" The agent's expression darkened. "We're coordinating with law enforcement agencies across the region. This hunting operation was too sophisticated to be an isolated incident. There are probably similar groups operating in other areas, using the same methods to target truckers on lonely highways." Over the next several months, the investigation uncovered evidence of a nationwide network of killers who had been hunting truckers as a form of sport. They used military tactics, high-tech equipment, and carefully selected hunting grounds to pursue victims who were isolated, vulnerable, and unlikely to be missed immediately when they disappeared. The group I had encountered in Colorado was just one cell in a larger organization that stretched across multiple states. Law enforcement raids in Nevada, Wyoming, and Montana uncovered more killing grounds, more victims, and more evidence of a criminal enterprise that had turned murder into a hobby. But for every cell that was shut down, investigators suspected that others remained active. The highway system that connected every corner of America also connected predators who shared information, techniques, and hunting territories through encrypted communications networks. 6 months after that night in the Colorado mountains, I was driving through Wyoming on Interstate 80 when I heard a familiar voice on my CB radio. "Breaker 19. This is Nightcrawler with a warning for drivers on I-80 westbound. We've got reports of abandoned trucks and missing drivers between Laramie and Rock Springs. Same pattern we saw in Colorado. You boys need to watch your backs out there." I grabbed my handset. "Nightcrawler, this is Rocky Mountain Rick. Are law enforcement agencies aware of the situation?" "They are now, Rick. Good to hear your voice, brother. Thought you might want to know. We got ourselves a new hunting ground to worry about." I looked at the empty highway stretching ahead of me toward the Wyoming mountains, thinking about predators who were probably already selecting their next victims from the stream of commercial traffic moving through the isolated wilderness. The killers I had encountered in Colorado were dead or in prison, but their methods lived on. Somewhere out there, other hunters were studying truckers' routes, identifying vulnerable targets, and preparing remote locations where they could pursue human prey without interference from law enforcement. Nightcrawler, how many missing drivers this time? 2 confirmed, maybe 3. Same MO. Trucks found abandoned with no signs of mechanical problems, drivers vanished without a trace. Wyoming State Police are calling them voluntary disappearances, just like Colorado did before your incident. I felt sick. Despite everything that had happened, despite the federal investigation and the arrests, the hunting was continuing. New cells were forming, new killing grounds were being established, and more truckers were disappearing into a nightmare that most people refused to believe existed. Any names on the missing drivers? Tommy Rodriguez and Billy Watson, both independent owner-operators hauling freight through the region. Good drivers, Rick. Family men who wouldn't abandon their rigs willingly. Tommy Rodriguez. I had met him at a truck stop in Denver about a year ago. A quiet man in his 40s who was hauling auto parts to support his wife and 3 children back in Texas. Now, he was probably buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the Wyoming wilderness, another victim of killers who hunted human beings for sport. I'm changing my route, I transmitted, taking I-25 south through New Mexico instead of continuing west on I-80. Smart move, Rick, but you should know, we're hearing similar reports from New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. Wherever these bastards got driven out of Colorado, they didn't just disappear, they spread out and set up new hunting operations. The scope of what Nightcrawler was describing was staggering. Instead of shutting down a single killing operation, law enforcement had apparently scattered a network of hunters across the entire southwestern United States. Now, instead of one hunting ground claiming 3 or 4 victims per year, there might be a dozen hunting grounds, each claiming similar numbers. My CB radio crackled with a new transmission from an unfamiliar voice. Any drivers monitoring this channel should be aware that reports of missing truckers are greatly exaggerated. Law enforcement investigations have found no evidence of foul play in any of these cases. The voice was cold, professional, and somehow familiar. Not the same person who had hunted me in Colorado, but similar in tone and cadence. Someone with military training who was comfortable using radio communications to spread disinformation. "This is Rocky Mountain Rick," I replied. "I survived one of these hunting operations, and I can tell you that missing truckers are being murdered by organized groups of killers. Any driver who thinks otherwise is putting himself at risk." "Rick Thompson, a.k.a. Rocky Mountain Rick," the voice responded immediately. "Federal witness in the Colorado trafficking case. We've been monitoring your transmissions for some time now. You should be more careful about broadcasting your location and travel plans." My blood turned to ice. Whoever was transmitting knew my real name, knew about my involvement in the Colorado investigation, and had been tracking my movements through CB radio communications. The hunters weren't just active, they were organized enough to conduct surveillance on witnesses who had survived previous encounters. "Nightcrawler," I transmitted. "I think we're being monitored by the people responsible for the missing drivers." Figured that was a possibility, Rick. That's why I'm broadcasting from a relay station instead of my truck. These boys are smart, well-equipped, and very dangerous. They've adapted their methods based on what happened in Colorado. The cold voice cut in again. "Carl Hensley, a.k.a. Nightcrawler, truck number 4792, currently operating out of a relay station in Cheyenne, Wyoming. You gentlemen are making this much too easy for us." Nightcrawler had been identified despite his precautions. If these hunters could penetrate electronic countermeasures and track CB radio transmissions to their sources, then no trucker was safe from their surveillance network. "All drivers monitoring this frequency should be aware," the voice continued, "that discussing these matters on open channels will result in immediate inclusion on our target list. We prefer to hunt truckers who are unaware of our existence, but we're willing to make exceptions for those who insist on interfering with our activities. This is Rick Thompson, federal witness, and I'm telling every driver listening to this frequency that there are organized groups of killers hunting truckers across the southwestern United States.
Contact law enforcement immediately if you encounter any suspicious activity. Silence filled the channel for several long moments. Then the cold voice returned, filled with a kind of predatory amusement that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Thompson, you've just volunteered to participate in our Wyoming hunting operation. We'll be in touch soon to discuss the rules of engagement." The transmission ended, leaving me alone with the knowledge that I had just painted a target on my back for every hunter operating between Colorado and California. By trying to warn other truckers, I had signed my own death warrant. But maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Maybe the only way to stop these killers was to draw them out into the open where law enforcement could identify and eliminate them. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed the number Agent Collins had given me for emergency situations. She answered on the first ring. "Rick? What's the situation?" "The hunting operations are active again. Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, maybe other states. They're monitoring CB communications and targeting drivers who try to warn others about the threat." "How do you know this?" "Because they just threatened me personally on an open channel. Used my real name and federal witness status to intimidate me and any other drivers who might be listening." Agent Collins was quiet for a moment. "Where are you now?" "I-80 westbound, about 50 miles east of Laramie. But they know my location and they're tracking my movements somehow." "Change course immediately. Get to the FBI field office in Denver as fast as you can. We'll provide protection while we figure out how to respond to this threat." "What about the other truckers? How many more drivers have to disappear before law enforcement takes this seriously?" "We're taking it seriously, Rick. But these hunters have evolved since Colorado. They're more careful, more sophisticated, and they're operating across state lines in ways that make federal jurisdiction complicated." I thought about Tommy Rodriguez and Billy Watson, about Johnny Martinez and Dave Peterson, about all the drivers who had vanished without a trace because they had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I'm not running to Denver," I said. "If these bastards want to hunt me, let them try. But this time, I'll be ready for them." "Rick, that's exactly what they want. They're trying to lure you into another hunting situation where they control all the variables. Then we control some variables of our own. Set up surveillance, coordinate with local law enforcement, and use me as bait to draw them out into the open." "That's incredibly dangerous." "So is letting them continue to hunt truckers without consequences. How many more drivers have to die before we stop playing defense and start fighting back?" Agent Collins was quiet for another long moment. "I'll need authorization from headquarters for an operation like that." "You better get it fast, because I'm not changing course, and I'm not hiding. If they want to hunt Rocky Mountain Rick, they can find me on I-80 westbound, heading toward the Wyoming state line." I ended the call and grabbed my CB microphone, broadcasting on the channel where I knew the hunters were monitoring. "This is Rocky Mountain Rick to whatever psychopath threatened me a few minutes ago. You want to play your hunting game? Fine. But this time the rules are going to be different. This time your prey is going to fight back." The response to my challenge came 3 hours later as I was approaching the Wyoming state line. My CB radio crackled with the same cold voice that had threatened me earlier, but this time there was something different in his tone, a kind of hungry anticipation that made my skin crawl. "Rick Thompson, you've exceeded our expectations. Most truckers who survive their first hunting experience become cautious, paranoid, afraid to venture into remote areas where we operate. But you're different. You're actually seeking us out." I keyed my microphone. "That's right. I'm tired of running from cowards who hunt unarmed drivers for sport. Let's finish what you started in Colorado." "Gladly. But this time, the game will be played by different rules. No more isolated truck stops. No more wilderness chases through the snow. This hunt will take place on the highway itself while you're driving, in full view of other traffic." The implications of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. They weren't planning to disable my truck and hunt me on foot through the wilderness. They were going to turn Interstate 80 itself into a killing ground,
using other vehicles as weapons while I was trapped behind the wheel of my rig. You see, Rick, we've learned from our Colorado operation. Isolated hunting grounds attract too much law enforcement attention when drivers disappear. But highway accidents happen every day. Commercial vehicles lose control, cross the median, collide with other traffic. Very tragic, but perfectly normal. Through my mirrors, I could see a convoy of vehicles approaching from behind. 2 black SUVs and a large pickup truck, all of them maintaining precise formation as they closed the distance to my trailer. The hunt had already begun. The beauty of highway hunting is that we can operate in plain sight without arousing suspicion. Just another case of aggressive driving that got out of hand, resulting in a fatal accident that was clearly the truck driver's fault. The lead SUV pulled alongside my trailer and began pacing me, matching my speed exactly while the second SUV moved into position behind me. The pickup truck had disappeared, probably moving ahead to set up some kind of roadblock or ambush point further up the highway. I grabbed my cell phone to call Agent Collins, but there was no signal. We were in another dead zone where the mountainous terrain blocked cellular communications, leaving me isolated and vulnerable while being surrounded by professional killers. Rick, you should see the beautiful choreography we've planned for your final performance. Multiple vehicle collision at highway speeds, followed by fire that will destroy any evidence of our involvement. The investigation will conclude that you fell asleep at the wheel and caused a tragic accident. The SUV beside my trailer began to drift closer, its driver clearly intending to force me off the road or into oncoming traffic. But I had 19 years of experience handling big rigs in emergency situations, and I wasn't going down without a fight. I downshifted hard and hit my air brakes, causing my truck to decelerate rapidly while the SUV shot past my cab. Before the driver could react, I swerved into the left lane and pinned his vehicle against the median barrier, using my truck's superior mass to control his movement. Sparks flew as the SUV scraped along the concrete barrier, its driver fighting to maintain control while I kept constant pressure on his vehicle. Finally, his front tire blew out from the stress, sending the SUV spinning across the highway and into a rollover that left it crumpled and smoking in the median. Impressive, Rick. But that was just the opening move. The second SUV had moved up alongside my cab, and I could see the passenger pointing some kind of weapon at my driver's side window. I yanked my steering wheel hard to the right, slamming my truck into the SUV with enough force to send it careening toward the shoulder. But instead of losing control, the SUV's driver skillfully recovered and moved back into attack position. These weren't amateur criminals. They were trained professionals who knew how to use vehicles as weapons in high-speed situations. My CB radio crackled with a new transmission, this one from Nightcrawler. Rick, I'm monitoring your situation from a surveillance aircraft. Federal agents are en route to your location, but they're still at least 20 minutes out. 20 minutes was an eternity when you're being hunted on a highway by killers who were using the interstate itself as their killing ground. But knowing that help was coming gave me hope, and hope was something I hadn't had much of since this nightmare began. Hang on, Rick. Don't let the bastards force you into doing anything stupid. The pickup truck that had disappeared earlier suddenly materialized ahead of me, positioned sideways across both lanes of the highway in a roadblock that would force me to either stop or attempt to ram through a barrier that might disable my truck. I had maybe 30 seconds to decide between certain death if I stopped, and probable death if I tried to break through the roadblock. The SUV beside me was still trying to force me off the road, while the one behind me was closing in to prevent any escape in that direction. Decision time, Rick. Surrender and die quickly, or fight and die slowly. Either way, this hunt ends in the next few minutes. That's when I remembered something from my military training 25 years ago. When facing overwhelming odds, sometimes the only winning move is to change the rules of engagement completely. Instead of slowing down or trying to ram through the roadblock, I aimed directly at the pickup truck and hit my air horn continuously while flashing my headlights.
To any oncoming traffic, it would look like a runaway truck emergency, a situation that might cause other drivers to get out of the way instead of trying to intervene. The pickup truck driver must have realized that I wasn't going to stop or swerve because he tried to move his vehicle out of my path at the last second. But 18-wheelers don't stop quickly, and my truck's momentum carried me through the roadblock with enough force to send the pickup spinning off the highway and down a steep embankment. I had broken through their carefully planned ambush, but I was still being pursued by at least one SUV, and there was no telling what other surprises they had prepared further up the highway. Very good, Rick. You're providing much better sport than we expected. But you should know that we've been planning this hunt for months. Every mile of Interstate 80 between here and the Utah border has been prepared for your final performance. Months of preparation. That meant roadblocks, ambush points, and escape routes that had been planned and rehearsed by professional killers who had turned highway hunting into a science. I might have survived the first attack, but there would be others, each one more sophisticated and more deadly than the last. My radio crackled with another transmission from Nightcrawler. Rick, surveillance shows multiple vehicles converging on your location from both directions. These bastards have turned a 20-mile stretch of interstate into a killing field. 20 miles of highway controlled by hunters who had been preparing for months to kill me. Even if I could maintain my speed and avoid the ambushes, I would eventually run out of fuel, or my truck would suffer mechanical problems, or I would make a mistake that would give them the opening they needed. But I had one advantage that they might not have anticipated. I knew these highways better than they did, having driven them for 19 years. I knew every truck stop, every rest area, every service road, and alternate route between Wyoming and Utah. Nightcrawler, what's the status on that federal response? 15 minutes out, Rick. Colorado State Police are also responding, but they're coming from the south and might not reach your location in time. 15 minutes. I had to survive 15 more minutes of highway hunting before help arrived. But looking ahead at the interstate stretching toward the Utah border, I could see more vehicles positioning themselves for attacks. A coordinated assault that would probably succeed in killing me before law enforcement could intervene. That's when I saw my salvation. A truck stop called Mountain View Plaza, about 5 miles ahead on the right side of the highway. It was one of those large travel centers that served hundreds of drivers every day, complete with fuel pumps, restaurants, and repair facilities. If I could reach that truck stop, I would have witnesses, security cameras, and potential allies in the form of other truckers who might be willing to help defend against an attack. The hunters might be professional killers, but they wouldn't want to conduct a firefight in full view of civilians and security personnel. Rick, you're heading for the truck stop. That's exactly what we want you to do. Mountain View Plaza has been closed for renovations for the past month. It's completely empty except for our associates who are waiting for your arrival. My heart sank. The truck stop that had seemed like salvation was actually another trap, prepared in advance as part of their elaborate hunting operation. They had probably been planning this specific chase for weeks, anticipating every move I might make and preparing countermeasures. But I didn't have any other options. The highway ahead was controlled by killers, the highway behind me was controlled by killers, and the empty truck stop was my only chance of finding defensible terrain where I might be able to hold out until help arrived. I took the exit for Mountain View Plaza and immediately realized that I had made a fatal mistake. The facility was indeed closed for renovations, but it wasn't empty. Dozens of vehicles were positioned around the parking lot in a pattern that created multiple killing fields with overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't just a hunting operation. It was a military-style ambush that had been planned and rehearsed with precision that would have impressed a special forces unit. Welcome to Mountain View Plaza, Rick, your final destination. I drove my truck into the center of the parking lot and shut down the engine, knowing that I was probably about to die, but determined to make my killers pay a price for their victory. I grabbed the shotgun I had hidden in my sleeper berth, a weapon I had purchased after the Colorado incident, but had never expected to need. Any drivers monitoring this frequency?
I transmitted on my CB. "This is Rocky Mountain Rick at Mountain View Plaza on I-80 in Wyoming. I'm being hunted by an organized group of killers who have been murdering truckers across the western United States. If you can hear this transmission, contact law enforcement immediately." The response came from the cold voice that had been taunting me all day. "No one's listening, Rick. We're jamming all communications within a 50-mile radius. You're completely alone." But he was wrong. As I climbed down from my cab with the shotgun in my hands, I could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the east. Agent Collins had managed to coordinate a federal response faster than anyone had anticipated. The hunters heard the helicopters too, and their carefully planned ambush began to fall apart as they realized that law enforcement was arriving in force. Vehicle engines started throughout the parking lot as the killers tried to escape before they could be surrounded and captured. I used the confusion to take cover behind my trailer, waiting for the helicopters to arrive while trying to stay alive in a crossfire between federal agents and professional killers who had turned America's highways into their personal hunting preserve. The battle that followed lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, 6 hunters were dead and 3 more were in custody. But I knew that somewhere out there, other cells were already adapting their methods, finding new hunting grounds, and selecting new victims from the millions of truckers who used America's highways every day. The hunt never really ends. It just moves to different roads, different states, different victims who don't know that predators are watching them through their CB radio conversations and tracking their movements through their electronic footprints. I still drive trucks, but I'm more careful now about where I stop, who I trust, and what I say on the radio. Because I know that somewhere out there in the darkness beyond my headlights, hunters are always waiting for the right moment to begin their deadly game. And eventually, despite all the precautions and all the warnings, they'll find new prey who won't be as lucky as I was on that cold Wyoming night when the hunt almost ended with my death. The highway connects every corner of America, but it also connects predators to victims in ways that most people will never understand. Drive carefully out there, because you never know when you might become the quarry in someone else's twisted game of survival. The hunt continues, and it always will, as long as there are isolated roads and vulnerable drivers and killers who have learned that America's highways make perfect hunting grounds for the most dangerous game of all.